Okay. Ms. Cohen? Ms. Corbett Sanders, I see you.
Good evening.
Ms. Darnak Kofax? Mr. Frisch?
Hello.
Ms. Keys Gamara?
Hello.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Good evening.
Ms. Marin? Ms. Pekarsky, I see you.
Hi.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Hello.
Ms. Tolan?
Good evening.
All right, let's go back around. Ms. Cohen?
Hi, good evening.
Ms. Darnak Kofax?
Good evening.
Ms. Marin? Okay. So today, we're going to be hearing from TPAC, the Title I Advisory Committee. As you guys know, Title I are schools that are eligible for additional supports based on the percentage. In FCPS, it's been 55%, which was a recent change, but is what we had. And just over this past year, that's 41 elementary schools and 1 middle school. So I'm going to pass it on to Mike Waltz, who's the chair of this committee. And I believe Nina Ben-Ghanem is here too, who is the vice chair. But Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Amish. And I will share my screen. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the report in great detail. It's not that long. Hopefully it was a quick read, even if there's a lot of content there. I will just briefly refer to the recommendations and hit some high points, and Nita will make additional comments, but we really wanted to have time for discussion. So this past year, actually, let me go to the next one, because this was for the 2021. So the charge was to increase parent capacity, comprehension of Title I services and opportunities, including providing information and materials in various languages, exploring the impact that behavior, health, and well-being have on students' educational success, and examining the curriculum and all elements of staffing to ensure that they are anti-racist in content and implementation. So I am pleased to say that we did have language services for all of our meetings in Spanish. We always want to increase, what services are available, but it's an improvement from previous years. So we're very glad for that. Sanderson, do you have a comment? See your hand up? No, okay. This is gonna go right to the recommendations for this upcoming year. So the first one, and I'll speak to each, ensure more robust delivery of advanced academics to all students, developing data among Title I schools that illustrates whether AAP services are being provided with greater equity and create opportunities for greater collaboration and engagement between the TPAC and the AAPAC. So I think what stuck out is really two parts. One is communication, and the other is really purpose or mission. In terms of communication, being that I have a high schooler now and middle schooler who are no longer in the AAP as, we know it in the elementary level, not something that I pay attention to anymore, but the fact that it was so low, I think it was like 0.12 out of a News You Choose email, and something that gets as much attention and discussion as advanced academics. I even remember a return to school PTA meeting last spring of 2020 where, regardless of whether the child was in person or not, parents were so I just want to make sure they have access to AAP. And whether we like that being the reality, we know it is. So being that it gets all this attention, it has so much focus, communication has to be commensurate with that. And not having at least a standard practice whereby schools have to have this information prominently displayed in their communications or in singular communication, or even more. I looked through my phone and saw all the text messages I got that were not relevant necessarily to our situation, but they were countywide. Why couldn't there have been a text message about AAP? And maybe because I have a 5th grader and 8th grader, maybe it's targeted for K-2 or K-5 or K-4, but it seems like that type of information should be something that we communicate in multiple platforms in multiple ways. And the fact that we found out about it just through one of our members happening who is very meticulous in checking things, and they almost missed it too. So, that was a real concern about how many people do we really want in this program in terms of diversity. You have to use different methods, multiple methods, and you have to test those methods. I don't ever remember getting, through the times that my children were in the program, any type of surveying or information gathering to assess how we knew about the program. How was the application process? What was our engagement with our advanced academic resource teacher? I don't ever remember any of those things. And if there's an intention or a desire to improve representation, then you have to be able to talk to those that are in the program and figure out what's working and what's not. And I don't know that that's ever happened. The other part really is just the function. Instead of having committees of folks who determine which children will have access to full-time level 4, and the reason why that's relevant is because the math that students have access to through level 4 sets them on a different path as soon as they get into middle school. Instead of having a committee determining what kids can get there, we need to get the content, and we need to get the academics to all students. And I don't know that I'm taking a step back to really look at how that's being done, whether it's an equitable manner. Are there certain schools that are delivering it more robustly across the board than others? That's a big problem. If we know certain schools are getting, certain students in schools are getting things that others aren't. I think that's a broader discussion, but it's one that we have to have if the intention is to diversify the access. Second point, developing a comprehensive marketing, education, preparation strategy around the CTE program. It starts in elementary school, so there's greater access to participation across all racial and ethnic groups within the county. Also explore opportunities for greater collaboration between TPAC and CTEAC. That just reminds me, I'm going to jump right back to recommendation 1 for a second. There really should be, I don't know whether it's a liaison from the TPAC to the APAC, but if students of color throughout the county are a group with whom representation is sought to increase, why is there not more concerted efforts to partner and work with groups that large constituent base are students of color, families of color? Even if we don't have somebody going to each meeting, there should be some type of parallel track or reporting or information or even facilitation through the school board where we are informing and measuring and evaluating through feedback and our experiences how effectively it's being done. All right, so I'm going to jump back to 2 now. The CT, I got to say, I knew very little about the program. And it's something that when we think about topics to make PTA meetings or even whatever other information sessions that happen in elementary school more engaging, this is something that should be front and center. If there's access and if there's support and if interest is sparked, CTE is a spectacular option for many students to take advantage of. But there's a lot of ifs in that equation. Has to start earlier so that parents and students are socializing it, thinking about it, and anticipating and preparing while they're in middle school. If you're only finding out about it at the end, you're really not going to be in the best position to take advantage of it. Because part of it is, since there's not a uniform offering at, all schools, whether students need to transfer because they want to be in a certain program or whatever decisions families want to make, they need to have time to make those. If we want CTE to have legitimacy on par with college, then we need to treat it as such. And it needs to be something that PTAs talk about, that, back to school night, whatever, I mean, whatever methods that we have for large scale communication with families, that needs to become part of it. But with the existing program, there doesn't seem to be enough interrogation of how effectively courses are being offered to all students in the program and what can be done to improve what is currently there. There just doesn't seem to be a lot of data. And if we want to improve what we're doing, we have to measure what we're doing now. And the fact that we don't know, specifically the race of students who are in certain programs and not in other programs. There's always conversation about, improving non-white student access to STEM. But do we know whether in the CTE program, they're having access to cyber, other IT-related courses? I can't really tell you what that looks like, but I know that we need to investigate and inquire what it is if we want to actually improve it. In terms of greater collaboration between TPAC and CTEAC, as I say, the same thing as with APAC. If there is a desire countywide to become more anti-racist, to increase equity, then you have to have groups that really specialize by lived experience, if nothing else, speaking to the areas in which that equity is lacking. So whether that's somebody, again, listening in on meetings or attending quarterly, there has to be some way that we know what's going on. And right now, there's some good communication and relationships between the two committees that I've mentioned, but it should be greater than just a relationship of individuals. There needs to be a process in place that no matter who's sitting in the chair, that information is flowing, that there's opportunities for collaboration and input to meaningfully improve what a program is providing. And I don't know how long it would take, but I know we're a long way from that. Recommendation 3, that FCPS make ongoing anti-racist training and development for staff mandatory, which must include more time dedicated to this training, the necessary expertise in human resources, and the required funding to meaningfully implement this as a core value of FCPS. In addition to providing resources for staff, there must be ongoing engagement, requests for feedback, and collaboration with students, families, and members of the community so that efforts to become more anti-racist can be undertaken with fidelity. I know that there's, staff training and development now, and it may be some around bias or cultural proficiency, but with anti-racism, it has to be ongoing, continuous, it has to be measured, needs to be surveyed, be evaluated, needs to be challenged. And the only reason why I'm better at racism than many people on this call is because I've lived with it. And if you don't live with something, you're just not going to be as good at it, and you're going to need a lot more time and exposure and work with it. So it doesn't do any good to staff if they just have Ibram Kendi speak at a high level at a leadership kickoff that gets filtered down several levels and may not even make it to staff. And even if it does, that alone is not enough. I did not see the talk, but I don't know that what came out of it was anything challenging folks, making them uncomfortable, moving them to take more drastic measures than are currently being taken. And this is something that's really incumbent upon our elected leadership, you school board members. Thus far, there really hasn't been any serious policies yet approved or implemented with anti-racism, yet there's been so much noise. I don't want to just call it criticism. A lot of it's noise because it's uninformed, it's ignorant, it's racist. And there really needs to be a recognition that it's just beginning and that it's going to get worse in terms of the volume and maybe even the number and even the types of criticism, but you'll have to take a stand. There's a two-way message sent by taking a strong stand on something. You communicate to people what you're not going to tolerate. You communicate to other people what you're in support of. I think this past year, some of that messaging has changed, but I always chuckled when I see in a statement about something that happened, there's no place for that here. There is a place for it here. But if we don't want there to be a place for it here, we're going to have to say it in policy and we have to say it in operations. There's no place for this type of racism or sexism or lack of respect for gender identity, sexual orientation, all those things. If we don't take strong stances in terms of policy and operations and accountability, then there is a place for it, and that place will still be here, and they'll be quite a comfortable place. While this wasn't a recommendation, I think it kind of flows into the charge for 2021 and 2022. It's about the public, and not only just what the public engagement committee process, and I have to say I'm somewhat in the dark on it because I was reached out to on behalf of the public engagement committee, and I was never followed up with. I reached back a few times and never heard back. So I don't know where things are in that process, but there has to be some consideration, contemplation on what is the purpose of these committees. Are we just to meet, talk amongst ourselves, and present recommendations, or just present, a recap of what we talked about to the school board? Or are we to have a say in how FCPS is going to be run? Our children are the ultimate stakeholders and are the ultimate clients. We are stakeholders. They are as well. They are really the foundational stakeholders in this, but there just doesn't seem right now, there's no real clarity. And I think part of that comes to, I think the process by which this structure even was formed or evolved. I think it preceded most or all of your tenure on the school board, but it wasn't something that I don't think was deeply contemplated at the time. It was probably more of a bureaucratic box checking exercise to where, we have community input, we have community feedback, we have community participation. I mean, even the name of this committee was previously called the District Advisory Council, and nobody had any idea what that meant. At least now, even if we're not doing what we want to get done, at least folks know if you're Title I parent advisory, it signals enough about who is the core membership of this group and what is our area of focus. But it doesn't seem clear how folks even gain membership on these committees. I know that with TPAC, it comes from principal, we call it nomination. Sometimes it's begging and pleading, just because I think a lot of principals don't have a clear understanding of what it is we're supposed to get done. And, they may look to it as, it's like the PTA. It's really not like the PTA, because unlike the PTA, we do have a direct line to the school board. And that's really the power in what we do. We have a direct voice to our elected leadership in a way that other groups don't. But I think the question is, what is going to be done with that voice? The other committees, I got to say, I'm not really certain as to how they're populated. I don't know if it seems to be school board nomination, but I don't know if there's a process where in each magisterial district, folks are reached out to for if they're interested in to apply this way. I've never seen anything to that degree. But the current method of populating and running these committees is guaranteed to keep us from getting the voices that are most needed at the table to have decision-making and influence over the operations. So wherever the process is, I say it needs to have, broad community input. I don't know how much of a step back needs to be taken if these committees just need to be, I don't want to say tweaked. I would say we need to add more committees, but I think the process by which people get to these committees needs to be, overhauled or created, because I don't know if there is a process right now. But I think there's a lot of power and experience and talent and wisdom amongst families in this community that are far from being leveraged to their full capabilities. I think that's all I have. I can keep the screen up. Let me just get on to the charge. And I think that I basically said it, but just to be clear, we want to empower this committee, more influence over policy development and implementation through more regularly scheduled collaboration with the school board and other FCPS senior leadership. We do a lot of it ad hoc, but it has not become embedded institutionally. And it really does need to be, so that the type of changes, the type of issues can be something that, when we're meeting, I mean, just imagining what our membership would think of, we're talking about something that's going to be implemented in schools in a year. That has a whole different framing than these are topics of interest that we're going to talk about. And I think we need to really think about how that's going to be done. But if we really want some of these longstanding issues to move forward in a positive direction, I think it's going to have to happen. I want to give my vice chair the opportunity to add any comments that she has before we take questions from board members.
Sure. Thank you, Mike. And you've said this, but I just want to emphasize that, we make these recommendations, but oftentimes we don't get follow-up. So can we get a commitment today from the board to have a follow-up meeting at some point to discuss the progress on these recommendations, what work is being done on the ground to implement these recommendations, so that we as members of a citizen advisory committee, we can report back to our membership, to our school communities, that there is actual action being taken on these recommendations.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Ben-Hanim. Dr. Anderson, perhaps we can have board members comment in response to that question. Folks, if you'd be amenable to a follow-up meeting about these recommendations. And then Dr. Anderson, obviously, maybe that's something you guys can discuss in chairs just to consider. But for now, let's go around and have our board members comment. So Dr. Anderson.
Okay, thank you. If I may respond to that piece, just not for my time, just to talk about the follow-up, that is something that has come up in chairs, and Dr. Braybrand, who I'm sure is here, maybe he'd like to speak to this as well, did talk about having a session where we do this in the fall, where we have the opportunity to respond, where staff also, as well as the board, get an opportunity to respond and have some structured time to all of the advisory committees feedback that we've received in these reports. If Dr. Brayburn does not want to add to this, I want to have my time be started and just jump right in. Thank you, Mr. Walls, in committee for this report. I have a number of questions that I'm hoping that I'll have a chance to get to. The first recommendation, where you're speaking about how to increase opportunity for our students to advance academics, I definitely am in great support of this idea. It's not just shoving more and more kids into the program, but it's providing opportunity for all. So I wanted to make sure that I articulated that. But most importantly, I wanted to also lend my support to the idea of having someone from the TPAC committee to the APAC committee, because that will help to really address the situation that is before us, which is how to increase participation in our Title I schools. So I would be happy to continue to carry that, to champion that idea to whomever it needs to be championed to, but to have that happen. You talked very quickly regarding other committees. Other committees, magisterial members and at-large members are all provided with an opportunity to appoint a member to the committees. Title I is one that does not happen, that is handled differently. I do want to point to I believe, the recommendation that speaks to the CTE. You talked in the report regarding demographic data. I wanted to point to that two of our colleagues, Ms. Tolan and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, during the last CIP did put forward for a program audit, and I think we did this in a forum, which will also speak to this, because this is good information to have. We need to know what programs are available where and who are attending. So definitely on the right track with that. And the board has begun some of this work in terms of putting it in front of staff as a priority. I also wanted to talk a little bit about recommendation 3. This is work that definitely has begun. And if Dr. Williams is with us, I would love for her to give some sort of summary in terms of where we are in this part of the process.
I'm here. Yep. Good afternoon. And thanks for the opportunity to speak to this recommendation. Certainly the work around the anti-bias, anti-racist curriculum development is going to be seminal to this recommendation. But in addition, there is cultural competency training that has been ongoing. Principals this year received training around leading for equity, and how to coach for that type of transformation. So it's just important to lift up all of the efforts that are happening at present, but certainly this recommendation and the policy environment will strengthen this work as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. The other piece that you talked about in the report, I believe on page 5, talked about standardizing the practice for communication. Could somebody on staff speak to what is the current practice? Because I know this is constantly a conversation where we want to ensure that all of the information is translated, that it's provided, and different practices are in place throughout the division. But what is the general expectation when it comes to the communication that we send to our families in this realm?
Well, Dr. Anderson, I'm not sure we have Ms. Lloyd with us this evening to answer that question. We certainly do put out a lot of our major communications in 7 languages, and we've continued to enhance the number of communications that go out in those 7 languages. I'd also just like to reference you earlier asked, just for a quick comment. This is a structure, like Mike said, this has been around for multiple boards. We have advisory meetings at the end of the year, right at the end, and then we do provide a staff response that's provided by the end of the summer, the beginning of the fall. I think the board's actually been exploring this issue in governance or in PEC about how to better close the loop after the presentations are done in June, and then we respond to the board in fall. How do we bring everybody back together to say which of these recommendations the administration is moving forward with and which ones are not, and they're not, and why not? And I think there's room to explore how to have that conversation. And I think it has been one of the tensions and one of the opportunities for improvement in communication and the way the structure is set up. And we'll be glad to work with the board as you all look at the best way to do that follow-up with these committees and their recommendations that they bring you each year. Thanks.
And Dr. Anderson, if I could just add to answer your question regarding the AAP and the whole process, all of the materials are prepared centrally and including the translations. And then the timeline for dissemination and the windows when they should be going out are provided to the schools to then put out to their communities. I do know that there has been some further discussion around how can we more centralize this process to make sure we're reaching everyone. And the instructional services folks would have to speak to the progress on that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ivy. The other thing that I wanted to share is I believe that we had a very similar conversation last time we had a presentation from TPAC. When it comes to standardizing some of the communication pieces, there's a space here where we can make this a little bit more robust, because this is a topic that is very important to many parents and they are missing it. Whether it's at the bottom of an FCPS news you choose, when we're talking about standardizing, all of the things you provided, plus including our parent liaisons, plus a text message. We need to add some additional things to have better access, or rather better outreach. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ms. McLaughlin.
Great. Happy to follow Dr. Anderson. So I do appreciate all the hard work put in by TPAC this year, the committee, and the recommendations in front of us. I did want to share with the committee chair, Mr. Woltz, as well as the other members who might be watching, that in my 9.5 years on the board, we certainly have heard from just about every one of our advisory committees a similar concern that you put in a lot of hard work, provide recommendations, and then it's unclear what will happen with those recommendations. In particular, people know that our committees, whether it's advanced academics or whether it's school health advisory, whether it's the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee, we frequently get the request on where do things stand. And part of it is because we do this right at the end of a school year, then we roll into a new school year. And so it's really tough for staff to get these reports during the bridge between the end of a school year and the start of a new one, and they're ramping up to start the next school year. So I do think that we are long overdue as a board to really work with our senior leadership and the superintendent to really look at what's a logical time so that we can build that in and make that happen, because we appreciate the amount of time people put into this. I will also ask Mr. Woltz, how much detail did our school staff and central office provide you in all three of these recommendations about what we currently do? Because I know our CTE advisory committee would like us to continue to improve on this, and it's not just our TPAC communities, but around the county. Access and awareness to CTE is an ongoing challenge, as well as even people being aware of AAP services, accessing AAP services in our non-Title I schools. So I know it's like a school system division-wide challenge. So could you maybe comment a little bit on that, on how much presentation and information you received about what we're currently doing, and did the community or did the committee then decide that what we're currently doing is insufficient? I'm just wondering what level of detail you got.
Well, we've had presentations. Make sure I'm muting myself. Okay, good. We've had presentations from staff from AAP, off the AAP office for several years, and it's not the information per se. It's how effectively it's reaching everybody and how well the program is being implemented. I mean, I think if you read a book, or if you read the FCPS book, a lot of it's good. But if you use it as an implementation guide, it breaks off. So it's really not in terms of CTE, it came from more communication with the chair of that advisory committee. And, I don't know that it's not even feasible to have enough time to even, as it is, we had to have this report much later than it was originally scheduled for, because I work for a living still. So this is volunteer and we need time to be able to do this. And because of that, it was like, there's no way we're going to be able to meaningfully put things together middle of May when we have just met. So that's part of why that collaboration needs to happen earlier and often, because it's not even, Title I staff is great support for us, but they can't be expected to run around and get all this and get all that information. I think that it would be more helpful if we could access all the information on a site, that broke things down demographically, socioeconomically, whatever. Then, in compiling our report, our discussion, then we could have that, that I think greater collaborative process where they can inform this, inform that. I mean, a lot of this just comes through systemic experiences. It's not just anecdotal, it's year after year, different person, different school, same type of break off and experience. I mean, that's what really, brings us to these recommendations, You know, I mean, some things go on really well, other places they don't. And what does that tell you? Yeah, individuals can be great, but a system fails if it doesn't have standardized practice that's reaching everybody in the method that it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know if I answered. Go ahead, Nina.
Oh, I just want to say we have basically empirical data, right? We have members all over they have children all over the county in Title I schools. And specifically regarding the CTEC data, we asked the chairman of that committee for the data on demographics, like which students are in the cybersecurity program, which students are in the auto mechanics program, for example. This data does not exist yet, or it wasn't provided to us. I mean, someone said, oh, it will be, he asked, I think, 2 staff members who work on this, and they told him it's not available at the moment. They will send it to him. And that was, I think, over a month ago. So that just tells you the uphill battle it is to get data. In terms of demographics for AAP, the same thing. But we actually know the answer because I was told whenever the number of, we could say minority students or any student group is less than 20, they will not share that breakdown on the publicly, at least online, or, you know, I'm not sure how to get it otherwise, but it just tells us that the number is so small. Like, for example, at my child's school, the number of African-American students in the AAP program is so small that they don't do a breakdown. So that, for me, answers my question, that there are not enough minority students in that school, because although it's 60%, I think, Latino, we still have like the numbers that they can't share them for Latino students. So that tells me the answer, that there are less than 20 students in that program who are Latino, although the school is 60% Latino, for example.
Well, again, thank you both. And I do agree with you that one of the things we continue to look at is how do we take our best practice guidance at central office, bring it down to 150 elementary schools, and then another 25 middle and 25 high schools, and try to then have that standardization of practice. So you're capturing something that really appreciated and important. So thank you for your work and service this year.
All right, next is Ms. McLaughlin.
She just spoke.
I'm sorry about that. Okay, we have Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. First, let me say that I applaud the work and the recommendations around expanding AAP. I'm not sure if our program review will give us a clear picture of how we're doing in terms of equitable implementation of AAP across the county, but I'm hopeful that will happen. And then we'll have some serious conversations to have. On the question of CTE, I want to applaud your committee for collaborating with our career and technical education folks. I think it's great to see committees collaborating together, and how critically important it is to begin that conversation at a very young age, to encourage students to think about all of the different paths that are open to them, and all of the great programs that we have in Fairfax County Public Schools. I know it was said, a question about standardizing communication to make sure that these and other things are being communicated to all families. I would argue that you certainly want to standardize like a base level of communication, but we're going to have to think outside the box in some places where we're not going to have to think outside of the box in others. So my hope is that we'll have more thoughtful communication as opposed to checking the box, standardized communications where we're doing the same thing everywhere, because we're going to get wildly different results just like we currently do. Do you have any thoughts on the types of communication that might work better in other places that may not be needed elsewhere?
That's a good point. And I think maybe a better word is really standard practice. You know, it will not be the same method if a school is 90% English speaking. Far fewer resources are going to need to be devoted to language support. But that doesn't mean you should overlook them altogether. And usually if the percentage is small enough, you know, it's a term I heard years ago, a statistically insignificant population, which means they just don't get counted. So I think the biggest shortcoming of current communication is unless it's happening and just not revealed to us, there doesn't seem to be a good way of measuring if it actually reached your intended audience or targets. I look back to the decisions that were made like mid-July about whether return in person, virtual, hybrid, whatever those options were. And I don't know what the rate of response was, but I think the problem with that entire endeavor is that I think the county as a whole has been taking for granted how effectively its message were reaching its intended recipients or audience. It's just something as vitally important as how are you coming back to school came up. We had never developed a really good system for reaching out to folks, making sure we reach them, what the follow-up is. We even had a discussion, I think, in the wintertime about just kind of doing a diagnostic of how families, well, actually, I think to track or measure or see if families who are no longer in the school system, if there's a way to even know who's there, how do we know they're there or not there anymore? I just think that communication as a whole has to be measured for effectiveness. It can't just be, let's try these 3 ways. And if we get 60%, it's like, why aren't we getting the full 100? What's happening? And I think that takes a lot of trial and error, but I think it has to be intentional so that when the real situation comes that has to get across to everybody, we don't have to wonder and hope, you know, of how many people it's going to reach.
I can appreciate that. And I think, you know, it comes down to a question of strategy versus tactics. If we're focused entirely on the tactics, we're missing the forest for the trees, right? We're thinking about, well, I checked the box on social and text messages and phone calls, therefore outreach has been done, versus a strategic approach, which looks at the adequacy of those outreaches to see if they need to be supplemented. So I can certainly appreciate that. And that's something that we've obviously talked about as a board in meetings about other types of community engagement, you know, the limited perspective versus trying to get out there and get more. One of the things you mentioned, Mr. Waltz, that I really appreciate is how we can better set up our advisory committees for success. And I'll let our PEC chair, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, speak to this, but we did meet today, the Public Engagement Committee. And one of the things that we've been talking about is formalizing a process for formal feedback and progress reports for our advisory committees. And that's not something that PEC will do unilaterally. It's something that they will ultimately come up with suggestions for the board to consider, and then the board will go forward from there. So I think that's going in the right direction. Additionally, we've been talking about ways to set the committees up for success, whether it's some kind of formal onboarding for committee members so that they know what committees do. You know, right now, you nominate somebody and you give them the best information you can. Maybe they sit down with the chair before the meeting starts, and then they begin their service to the community. We could be much more thoughtful about how we do that so that we're arming our committee appointees with the tools they need to succeed on the committee and a full understanding of what the commitment to those committees are. Because right now it's just like any other volunteer endeavor. People give their time, and some people give a lot of their time to the cause. So PEC's moving those balls forward, and you know, I'm hopeful that in the near term we'll be able to make some progress there.
All right, Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Thank you, and I'm glad to follow Mr. Frisch, and I know Ms. Sizemore-Heiser is following me, so all of us at PEC, and you were there as well, Ms. Omesh, can add a little bit. But one of the things that was very important about the dialogue at PEC, and it's something that I learned when I was the chair of the Advanced Academic Programs Advisory, was the importance of cross-collaboration between the advisory committees. And that is something that will also be coming forward as a recommendation on how we can more closely have our advisory committees collaborate on different projects and different areas of importance to the school system and the school board. But Mr. Waltz, I found your report very well written and very helpful. I look at it as something that you could summarize your recommendations in essentially 3 buckets. One is the importance of communications, not only strategic communications, but ongoing communications. And I would urge that the superintendent, working with Ms. Lloyd, make sure that this communications piece is built into the communications plan that is going to come forward to the board soon, because I think this is critical. The second is access to opportunity. And when I say access to opportunity, we talk about access to opportunity for advanced academics as well as career and technical education and opportunities in the field of math. But what we're talking about is access to opportunity from the moment that students walk into our buildings. And so often what happens is we have gateways and we don't talk about the future opportunities until our students are at the precipice of taking advantage of them. And what we really need to do is start early on from the day that students walk into our buildings. And I would love to hear your input on this, and actually have almost an individualized plan that we begin to work with our parents to develop that opportunity pathway. You know, is it through advanced academics? Is it through a more robust CTE, which means that you have to clear up opportunities in your schedule in high school, which means taking courses in middle school. And then finally, you mentioned about what the availability in different places. And that really is something that this board has consistently talked about, which is the fidelity of implementation, because we do know that the opportunities are not consistently available, that the FCPS promise is not realized at every one of our schools. And so we do need to do that audit. But I am glad that we'll be talking a little bit later this evening with the CTE advisory, and they have started that audit process, so we can unpack that a bit more. But Mr. Waltz, would you like to talk about, respond to my comments?
Yes. And I think the main one is what you said about from the time children enter school. I like that idea a lot. And I think what it actually does, it creates more of that village that we talk about, because it's a continuation, but it's also, it's a potential, it's an asset-based approach, it's value added, it's, you know, we're going to help this child, this student, build what they want. And I think the importance of something like that is when decisions would normally be made at the end of a second grade year. I think that process itself will say, why are we making this decision in second grade? We don't know what's going to happen by the time they're in ninth grade. And even though their, you know, their reading scores or whatever aren't a certain level, they really do like this thing in math, but we're about to take them away from that because of this. And how is that going to affect them down the road? You know, there's a lot of students who have no interest in something because somebody snuffed that flame out early on. The student doesn't remember. You know, they don't know exactly when it happened, but they just consider a whole area not for them. And I think if we start with, you know, boundless opportunities for them and allow them to pursue it through, you know, whatever path. I don't want to say program, because sometimes programs can be too restrictive.
It's multiple pathways.
Right. I think that will help spark and maintain their attention and interest throughout grade years as they promote. I think we don't look at discipline. Well, there's a lot of issues I have with how it's looked at. One that we seem to overlook is how engaged is a student in their classroom experience. You know, a lot of times if you are turned off for this or that reason, you'll find yourself in trouble or whatever else. But how often are kids just bored, not connected, disaffected, detached from what they're learning? And we don't appreciate the impact that has on them or what we're setting them up for. So I think if we really listen to them and let them tell us what they're ready for, what they want to do, and give them access to it, we're going to have more engaged students. The word behavior, which is another problematic word, will not become uttered as much as it is now. There's just so, more useful ways that we could be starting their path. So I like that concept that you started, that you mentioned, and whatever form or where that's at now, that's definitely something that I think our group would be, thrilled to take part in.
I will tell you that I have been an advocate for ensuring access to those opportunities for well before I was on the board. And one area in particular is the access to advanced math opportunities, which the previous board did make, or 2 boards ago made some changes to, but unfortunately the implementation limited it to only ensuring advanced math at the 6th grade level. So we want to pull that back and see it being pushed down into all elementary schools. Thank you.
Just a reminder so that things don't happen again, please lower your hand if you finish speaking. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. And I'm very happy to follow both Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Mr. Frisch, as well as you, Ms. Omesh, as the chair of the Public Engagement Committee. It's really fortuitous that you brought up some of the thoughts around our advisory committees, because Ms. Mayer and I actually brought a forum topic around this last year on really looking at our advisory committees and how they can better, how we can increase and improve the functioning, the collaboration, the ability to get, ongoing advice from our experts on these committees on policy and issues. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And many of the things, I'm not going to repeat sort of Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Mr. Frisch, they shared many of the good things that PEC is doing, but we literally had a long conversation today about many of the things that you discussed, including how do we do some of this cross-committee collaboration that you recommend in recommendation 1 between TPAC and APAC. We're really looking holistically at all of our committees and where are there natural places for cross-committee collaboration and how can we encourage that, as well as how do we have systems and processes built in place for regular, if not formal reporting, but at least regular collaboration and conversation about issues that are going on. So we're not just waiting, as Ms. McLaughlin said, to the end of the year for the report, but we get information year long, as well as a more formal report at the end of the year that we can act on. We're talking about follow-up actions and having a process for that follow-up for committee recommendations. So, not just sort of a response, but also a follow-up on actions taken in response to those committee recommendations. And I think it's helpful that many of us on this board were members of these advisory committees before we came on the board. So we're familiar. I know Ms. Omesh was, Ms. McCarthy, myself, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Cohen, and I know others. So I apologize if I missed any names, but so we're familiar with the desire as to give back and to bring expertise and the really wealth of knowledge our advisory committees can support. And one of our next steps in PEC, now that we've sort of come almost finishing what we're calling an operating manual, is to get community feedback on this operating manual and of course bring our recommendations to the board for their feedback. So I'm really excited you brought that up, and it just shows really the need for this work that PEC's been doing all year, the Public Engagement Committee. I just wanted to sort of mention one other thing. I really like your recommendation 2 around the marketing, education, and prep strategy around the CTE program. And I think that's, not just our academies, but all of our CTE classes, because I've I've said to others before, I really think we need some sort of exposure or information or something to upper elementary or middle school for our students, because sometimes, if we're trying to help our students find whatever their path to success is, sometimes they don't know what they don't know. Right. And so much of our education is focused around, sort of traditional academics, that our students may not realize that they have a passion or interest in CTE if they don't. I don't see. So I think that's a really good recommendation, and I hope we can sort of flush that out further. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you very much for this great report.
Any response? No. Okay. Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. Thank you for all your work. Now following Ms. Corbett-Sanders and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I'm going to sound redundant, but really focusing on this recommendation number 2 around CTE. I agree with what they both have said. I think we have a systemic problem here when it comes to parent education about opportunities and student education, and really understanding what is available to them, understanding how they can harness their strengths and their interests to kind of set a plan for themselves. We have opportunities in these programs to perhaps earn a certificate, and then you can go off to work and perhaps pay for college. So I know we are not doing a great job of ensuring that our students and our parents have this information and can look forward. So I am one who is very interested about seeing what we can do earlier in those early grades to really provide a more individualized, kind of transition plan, if you will. And I know Ms. Sizemore-Heiser and I have talked about this a lot, for students with opportunities once they move on to middle and to high school. And I think this is an ongoing problem of communication, and one where if we can find a way to individualize more, it will really help our students in terms of access and in terms of just planning out what they want to do, what their goals are, and finding ways to actually fulfill those goals and be successful. And I definitely see areas for things like parent education videos. I know we do academy open houses, but a lot of those things just don't trickle down. So I'm really interested in ways that we can use some of this technology that we have all gotten so good at utilizing during the pandemic to disseminate more information, and parents, feel like they have control and understanding of all of the many, many wonderful offerings of our school system. And I know even I, every day as a long-time parent, would learn about new things. So, thank you.
I'm going to speak to that really quickly and a few other previous comments. The importance of getting this earlier is that we never know when that spark is going to happen in a place that student may have never appreciated, never understood that it was going to be. And if they're able to see early on, this is what you could be, and, it helps to, be strong in this area. You can motivate them to have a different level of focus and engagement for a subject that they may not have had before, because they need to see that connection. Why does this matter so much for this? I mean, as functional adults, most of what we do is not beyond 5th grade math. But if you tie other things to certain careers, and think about Iron Man. He's an engineer, but nobody thinks about the STEM aspects of him because he's cool and all those other things. We have too many examples to make things tangible for students, and we're not taking advantage of, and they continue to be our greatest marketing tool. So during whatever they call, and my son's middle school is Panther time, whatever period they have for, I'll be honest, I don't even know what the total purpose is. If it's like a free period study hall, just overall development, how about you slip a video to a student? They'll tell parents everything. If they see something they like, they'll tell us everything we need to know about it. Like, we do not use our best marketing tool as often as we do. And I go back to attending concerts. Every time there's a concert, anytime there's an award ceremony, there is standing room only. And we don't think parents really are engaged or care, but they do. We're not communicating as effectively why they should care about this and what this means. That same energy, that same type of movement could take place if we're doing it the right way, so that students very simply, oh, I want to do this. Listen to this. There's many ways we can bring more people to the table.
Thank you, Mr. Waltz. Next, we have Ms. Tolan.
Thank you. Thanks for this report. And just to, as I've been listening to the discussion, happy to hear these comments. I have a question. It's probably for staff, actually. I'm just trying to think about piecing things together and things that we already have in place. I know there was considerable work done, a few years ago on taking our system that we had for kids to, house their ACT or SAT scores and, general interest and information about, colleges, to bring that down to the middle school level and do like a Myers-Briggs kind of thing with the middle school kids. So they would, get, some ideas about careers and areas that they might be interested in. And then that was available to the students and the parents. I'm just listening, and of course, middle schools, I agree, we want to get to kids earlier than that, but at least that might be another avenue where if a student, it goes through this process and it's identified, for a particular interest in a career area or something like that, that may be a time to bring up these various opportunities that we have across the school district, whether it's a CTE, offering or advanced math or whatever might be available as they're moving forward through the system. Can anyone remind me what that system is and what some of the potential might be for that? Looks like Dr. Presidio has this.
Yeah, Dr. Presidio can.
Thank you, Ms. Tolan, and good evening, everybody. And thanks again for that question. So we actually have our academic and career planning process, which is an elementary, middle school, and high school process. But we've mostly focused in the implementation at this point, as you pointed out, Ms. Tolan, at the high school level and to some degree at the middle school level. It's been a goal for really the last couple of years to expand that work down into the elementary school level. And there's career exploration work that happens. We have different programs that we use. One of them is called Naviance that helps students investigate different career pathways that they might be interested in and set goals. So there's really a lot of resources and infrastructure that we have built in, but we're just a little bit behind our timeline for expanding that work. As you can imagine, we didn't really take that additional expansion work on during the pandemic. So, as we come out of the pandemic, I think these recommendations definitely would support the work that we're trying to implement around academic and career planning for all of our students.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking for ways to, utilize systems. I mean, even like Ms. Persky said, we've all got this technology out there that's used what we already have. So I'm happy to hear about that. Thank you.
Was that all, Ms. Tolan?
Yes, other than just a huge thank you for all the work that this committee has done. I always appreciate the advisory committees and the work that they do. Thank you, Mr. Waltz.
All right, Ms. Jana Kovacs.
Yes, and let me begin by thanking the committee chair and its members for all the hard work that you do. We do appreciate it. And I will say, as I go through the recommendations, I'm going to start with number 2 about the CTE. And we have worked very hard, I think, to try to make this happen, but I think we have fallen short as far as one thing that's been difficult. And for me as a new board when I was a new board member, I realized the disparities of the CTE programming. And we still haven't gotten to the point where we are able to have offerings, at least in each region, so everybody can access it easily. I know as a parent, my daughter was not able to access something that she really wanted to because there was no way to get her a bus there, and it was impossible for her to drive there without missing 2 full school periods. So that has been a frustration of a lot of people, I think, for that. And I know that part of it has been financial reasons, but I think Dr. Brabrand and Dr. Presidio, this is something that we as a system need to continue to look out for. Number 1, I am the liaison this year to the Advanced Academic Program Advisory Committee, and I'm certain that group and its staff would welcome any type of collaboration your group would like, TPAC would like. One thing I think that I am very happy about, and you probably already know this, but I do want to say that, 2 budgets ago, we were able to add advanced academic resource teachers in all of our Title I schools. This year, even in a restricted budget, we added them to another cohort. It's our goal to get them everywhere. We also have been talking about front loading, making certain that we have advanced academic programming at some level available to every child. So they need it so that every child is getting the most rigorous thing that they're needed. Again, I think we continue to fall short there, but I think with the front loading of the Young Scholars Program, adding a lot of teachers and positions to support that in this year's budget will help us some. And I am concerned a lot about what you said about the model not being spoken of. And maybe Dr. Presidio, you can help me talk about how do we connect families and how do we communicate to families about advanced academics. I know APAC a few years ago, that was their sole purpose, how to change communication strategies. And I feel like we've upped our game, but maybe we're not quite there. But Dr. Presidio, if you could kind of just speak to what we do on that level.
Sure. I think like anything, there's definitely areas that we want to continue to improve in. So I think these recommendations are very helpful and we certainly appreciate them. But as you point out, we have worked really hard over the last several years to really expand our family engagement. So there's a lot of things that happen from school-based events for parents in terms of information sessions to help them really understand the programming, the 4 different levels of service, the application process for students to be identified for services and to apply for level 4 services. We've really done a lot of direct outreach to individual families using our AARTs for students that maybe need a little bit of additional support and assistance. So our young scholars, for example, level 3 students that might need information about how to be considered for level 4 services, receive direct outreach from our AARTs. And we've done a lot of work to integrate AAP in the general education setting with advanced academic curriculum and teachers, again, engaging families about the curriculum that they're using that is part of the AAP program. So there's a lot of different things that we've done. Certainly a lot of, multilingual communications that have been increased, but again, there's always certainly room for improvement. So.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that's all I have. Thank you again, Mr. Waltz and your team for this report. We appreciate it.
All right, I'll go ahead and take my turn. Thank you, Mr. Waltz and Ms. Van Lanem, for everything.
I think Ms. Van Lanem had a comment regarding.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, please go ahead.
To add a couple of things. You know, when I look at things like on paper, on the website, everything like looks good. The AP program, I looked through the Arabic, the options. If I was a parent who preferred to communicate in Arabic, it was messed up, and they shared that with Kirsten, right? Like when I click on something, it becomes the English again. And in Arabic, at least, there is like a lot of usage of Google Translate that is not accurate. A lot of times it doesn't even make sense. So we really can't say we're serving the families if this is what's happening. And sometimes the quality of translation is an issue and families just give up, honestly. They're not even willing to take the time to read. So there needs to be like more accountability there. And in terms of the AAP program, I think I can speak from my child's experience. When you have like one teacher in one school and you don't have options, you know, this person is going to be there maybe all 7 years of the child being in this school. And I didn't feel that person, for example, like had the cultural sensitivity or awareness or whatnot. And if this is the experience that other parents have at other schools, it honestly does a disservice to our students and our families. And without the data, you know, this thing that I spoke about, when there is less, I was told when there is less than 20 students from a particular demographic group that the data will not be broken down. That already tells us, you know, we're failing, right? If a Title I school is, you know, over 60% students of color and there are not enough in the AAP program, we already know we're not doing enough. So I believe there needs to be more oversight, more accountability. And I mean, hiding the data really doesn't solve the problem, because whatever is hidden is clearly like not something that the school system wants to share with parents. Honestly, I mean, as I've learned now being in this committee for a couple of years. So I just wanted to highlight and emphasize that. And lastly, about the recommendation for anti-racism, it would be like remiss of me not to mention one thing that I've seen time and time again in the meetings I attended about equity in FCPS. We cannot pick and choose the kind of hate that we want to fight based on what's cool at the moment. So with the death of George Floyd, of course, anti-Black racism came to the forefront. It's long overdue by centuries that we address that kind of hate, but we must also address the other kind of hate that our students and communities face for being Arab, for being Muslim, for being Jewish, for just really being different. So I just wanted, you know, that to be highlighted, because there is no anti-racist curriculum if we're just, you know, thinking, oh, let's just be cool and help this one group that's getting all the media attention right now, when our school system is so diverse. And I think the attacks on Abrar really highlight to me, just they bring back memories of my own trauma as an Arab American Muslim woman, visibly Muslim, and the hate I face, the worries I have for myself, for my child, for my community. And I just hope that's always addressed in PD, in the staff development, because there is really a lack of, virtual learning exposes us to how the teachers are teaching our children. And what I've heard from parents is, you know, sometimes a complete lack of sensitivity to cultures that are not the dominant culture in this country.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take my turn. Thank you, Mr. Waltz and Ms. Van Lanem, for your presentation and emphasizing these points. A lot of the work on which has been long overdue. I did want to just address, you know, in speaking to the family engagement, I think that this committee is unique because you also have representatives from every one of the Title I schools. And so I just wanted you to touch on that a little bit, Mr. Waltz, if you could just help clarify. You mentioned earlier that you have the data at the table in the committee. And I just want to make sure that that's clearly delineated, especially in better understanding, you know, what these parents feel and think, having represented all these schools around that family engagement piece. I mean, what's their feedback on that?
To make sure I understand your question, when you said we have the data, you said that.
Oh, there was a comment made earlier. I think it was you, but about saying how you have the data available to you because you have representatives from all these different schools who are on the ground and understand the realities. It may have been Ms. Mangano, it was one of you.
Oh, I think that, I don't want to speak for Ms. Mangano inaccurately, but I think what I was saying is we can speak to our communities, students and families can speak to what's really happening. I think because of lived experiences, we can talk about how students are being ushered away or led to advanced academics, being over-disciplined, facing racism, Islamophobia. I mean, I think that, I don't know if I'm really answering it in the best way. I just think that there's such, in 40 schools across the county, and one middle school, there's such variety, such variance, but still similar stories, similar situations. And if you're 30 miles apart, but you have the same situation, then it's not about kindness. It's not about how someone was raised. It's a system failure. And we're able to often diagnose how effectively something's happening just based on what our families say. And I think that's why in talking about collaborating with other committees, like it's essential. If everyone's specializing or if each committee is focusing on a certain area, but you don't have a committee focusing on the group that's supposed to be receiving it, you're definitely going to miss. I don't know if that answered what you were saying or not.
Yeah. No, that's exactly, I mean, your point on being able to kind of diagnose the extent to which we're implementing effectively, because people on the ground are speaking to that.
And so I can tie that to even recommendation 3. It's really important that staff has time. They need time for this training. And it's learning. I think of training as something that, it may be a set time, set period. Learning, I think, is more an ongoing process. And that's what it really needs. It needs to be learning. Through my 2 children's experience, and I only have a rising high schooler, even though we're at a different socioeconomic level that Title I is defined by, because they're Black boys in the school system, there's volumes of writings documenting how many ways the racism in this county manifests itself every day. And these are both AP, the good Black students, if you will. A teacher hung up on us because they were confronted over not following the grading policy that the board recently implemented late winter. If that's happening over following policy that you all implement over grades, really have to take a close look on what it's going to be when it comes to anti-racism. What's the pushback going to be then? What's the possible retaliation going to be then? What's the blowback going to be? Again, one of my children reported discriminatory treatment from a teacher. The follow-up action that alerted us to it was the teacher yelling at him in the hallway, waving a clipboard in his face. And it was only for his counselor who came by and diffused the situation that we ever knew about it, because the school, and I want you all to really appreciate this. We talk about engagement, but it seems like after elementary school, it's like, okay, you're on your own. We need more engagement the further students go, because they're transitioning into adolescence. They're more independent. There's I'm going to say opportunities, but there are going to be situations for more confrontation because they're getting closer to adulthood. And it just seems to be a free-for-all. And the danger is that, suppose an SRO saw him react negatively, being confronted by somebody who he already said was discriminating against him. What happens to him then? Because we force the issue, because we take things proactively, we can ensure a more successful path for him. But it's that very reason why I'm on this committee. because I recognize that I'm unique and a lot of people are not comfortable or familiar or experienced in this path. And those are the people, those are the students that need this more than anyone. You're on
Ms.
mute.
Smith? Yeah, thank you. Ms. Smith, I see your hand.
Sure. Mike's been doing such a beautiful job, sharing thoughts. But one thing I want to lift up, a lot of what Mike is talking about, and a common theme I'm hearing is two-way communication. And as you recall from that family engagement survey we did a few years ago, that is an area that we're so large. We do a lot of talking to, talking at. We are not co-designing with, we are not talking with. And so I'm hopeful and I'm excited and looking forward to the work around the family engagement policy, which with subsequent regulation, because that is where we may be able to get not only our values down, but some expectations, to Mike's point around doing things with our families, not to our families, co-designing, co-creating. And so I just wanted to lift that up as a connection to some of these charges as some possible future work. But I appreciate all the things that Mike and Nina have shared.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. To my colleagues, I would share that having worked with this committee, I guess, for 2 rounds now, the 2 words I think about in describing, how they characterize their experiences are frustration and confusion. There's a lot, the stories that, our chair and vice chair shared, there are many, many more that get shared in these meetings. And I'm just really concerned about, what we're doing on that front. The language piece, there was some testimony today that, the quality is a concern, but even the extent to which translation is available, what is translated. These are all places where there are major gaps and we have to commit resources. So I just want to flag this because I know this time around we committed, certain positions to ESOL, which is another neglected area, which we continue needing to support. This is another one of those places where, bridging that gap for families to provide the best opportunity for kids to be successful is going to be essential. And we have to commit those resources the next time around we look at that budget. I also wanted to touch on the advanced academics piece and the anti-racist work. I had a question for you guys. From your understanding, what is the biggest hindrance to accomplishing these pieces, especially expanding equity and access to AAP?
I would say for AAP, I think it's the discretion, and the oversight or lack thereof. I don't know, outside of, there's supposed to be information sessions. I never know what it's like on the back end or what families understand or experience or what sense they get of whatever was delivered and presented to them. You have to be on such a high level of awareness to even sit where I'm sitting right now that it's hard for me to appreciate what somebody who's not sitting here, what it's like to navigate and to understand and to parse out what's important, what's not, what do they need to know. I talked to somebody this past spring who's like, oh, I totally missed the whole thing about AAP. And they were looking into having an appeal or a test at George Mason. I just think that and maybe somebody can inform that, but I think there seems to be a baseline in terms of, what has to be provided and not a measurable goal on how effectively it's being provided. Like, we know the same way, as I said earlier, there may be a school with 90%, native English speakers, so they're not going to need the same language services. There are families, community schools where large percentages of the parents there are already keyed in to how to get their students connected to opportunities. So they don't need as much support, if you will. But for those that don't, it's like they're there, but they're not really there. And I think this is part of why when we talk about this advisory committee structure, we will not get people who we need if we don't look harder, broader, wider, and deeper. We need to have people on an advanced academic committee who applied and didn't get in. We absolutely need to have people there because they can identify what's missing, what's wrong, what didn't go right. The only reason we were able to be successful in getting our students' grade change to what it should have been, I happened to be on a focus group about grading policy, secondary grading policy. And I literally said out loud, I said, I feel like I need to do an audit now, because when I saw certain policies, I was like, late work should be accepted, minimal penalty. I wouldn't have known if I wasn't on it. And based on the communication had with the teacher, we were not the only one. We were not the only one. And I know we're not the only school. So that's one big component. The other, it was regarding, I think, anti-racism. The biggest hindrance is the willingness to be criticized for doing the right thing. If anybody going into it thought it would be, let me think of some, boundaries are always a controversial, heated topic, but if they thought it would be close to as bad as boundaries, they really don't understand racism. This is going to be the fight of your tenure on this board, because this has been the fight of this nation's soul since before it started. If we are not recognizing, leaning into all the opposition that's coming, but more importantly, finding all the support that's there, but doesn't believe that you really are going to do what you said you're going to do, then we're missing an opportunity, and we're also kidding ourselves. This will be the fight of your tenure to make this school division more anti-racist. It's funny that the county that I grew up in, Loudoun, they're talking about the CRT, which none of this is. It's just basic history. I mean, reading a book that one of my college professors wrote about, it's called Ebony and Ivy. It talks about how the earliest universities, the most prestigious ones in this country, did not just benefit from slavery. They were dependent. There was a relationship, a deep relationship. And that's something that we should be teaching students. They should know and understand, why is Harvard so prestigious? Because it was the first university that profited, was created from the slave trade. That's why. It was the first in time, first in line. We don't teach that. And what's interesting is that one of the criticisms said about CRT, it'll teach you to hate white people. I'll tell you a little story. I was in my AP US history class, 11th grade. And I remember that at the end of our 2-day or so lecture on slavery, our teacher decided to editorialize. And, if you're back when you wrote with a pen, I guess, in class, taking notes. And I remember she said, not all aspects of slavery were bad, and some masters really loved their slaves. I can tell you one person who hated white people at that moment. I stopped writing, but the danger was not even to me, as much as it was for all the other, mainly white students in my class who kept writing, internalized that. They're the people out here now who think the soul of their country is being challenged because they were so poorly taught. We have to be steadfast. We have to correct inaccurate depictions, because this is not close to CRT. That's another discussion. That's another time. We're not ready for that. This is the foundation. I think there has to be not just a survey that went out in the spring, but there needs to be more partnering, more engaging with community organizations that are committed to this and members of the community to get our stories. I've written plenty to you all. You've read them. You may have forgotten them. And I'm just one of 100,000+ stories of racism played out in this county, but not because this county is unique, but because it's in the United States. I really think those are the biggest challenges. And that's something that we will in partnership have to fight against together.
No, I appreciate you outlining that. I mean, I think, in kind of putting together here as a board, what we want to take from this, one, as we said, committing the resources, especially for language access and having depth and quality. But two, based on what you're sharing, with advanced academics, I think we've had opportunities where this has come before us and really thinking about how we want to expand that access beyond, I've, been pushing for us to really consider opening the gates and allowing people to opt into that. And I would urge my colleagues to consider the same, since we keep hearing it from MSCOC, from TPAC, and various other committees. And the second piece is going to be our role to clarify some of the confusion out there, as Mr. Woltz pointed out, around some of the anti-bias work, because that is going to be essential. And I hope that we can be thoughtful, maybe collectively at our retreat coming up, but whether or not that happens, being thoughtful before we speak on these issues, just so that we get the language right and don't shoot ourselves in the foot and undermine really important work that's been happening for a long time, or has been waiting to happen for a long time. So with that, I know that we are short on time, so I'll pause there. I hope that, Dr. Anderson, we can follow up on this meeting as they requested. I feel strongly that that's something we can and should do. But otherwise, I want to hand it off to Ms. Corbett-Sanders for the next session. Thank you, Mr. Woltz and Ms. Van Ghanem.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Ms. Omesh. I know that we are now about a half an hour behind schedule. And so I apologize to the members of both the CTE Advisory Committee and the Adult Community Education Advisory Committee that we are going to try to catch up a little bit. I asked from my colleagues that instead of ending promptly at 9, if we could go till 9:15, and that way we'll get about 50 to 55 minutes with each of our advisory committees, because like the TPAC, these committees have put in an extensive amount of work, and there is a lot of intersectionality between what the TPAC did and the work of the CTE Advisory Committee and the work of the Adult and Community Education Advisory Committees. So with that, I would like to introduce everybody to the chair of the CTE Advisory Committee, Mr. Charles Britt. He is known to many of you and has been a devoted member of our community and a leader on CTE initiatives with the county. And in addition to Mr. Britt, I would like to make sure everybody knows Whitney Ketchledge, who has been the school system liaison to the CTE Advisory Committee. And with that, I'm going to let Mr. Britt take over.
Good evening. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate the introduction, and good evening to everyone. In typical fashion, I'm sure I can help you make up about 15 minutes of that with my presentation, particularly since I talk rather fast. I will defer to you all how many questions you ask afterwards, but I do agree that that was a very timely and important conversation. So, and as she mentioned, there are certainly intersectionality with the work that we did as an advisory committee to the conversation that you just had around equity in programs within the school division. Whitney, I'm not sure if there was something you wanted to add before I get started with the presentation?
No, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us tonight, and I'll let Charles kick us off.
Okay, so I think I've been given the capability to share my screen. So let me find the proper screen here. I believe I am sharing a PowerPoint presentation. Is that visible to everyone?
Yes, Charles, it's very visible. Thank you.
Okay. So So I am going to provide the annual report on behalf of the Career and Technical Education Advisory Committee for the 2020 and 2021 school year. This is our charge that we were given by the school board in collaboration with key stakeholders. We were to ensure and look into equitable access, inclusion, and participation in all CTE programs. I was the chair of the committee for this year, and my vice chair was Alexa Krazel. On the next line is a list of all of the committee members. Once again, we had the pleasure of having Ms. Corbett Sanders as our school board liaison, and their respective school board representatives are listed in addition to community representatives from the PTA, business and industry, and as well as representatives from the central office, from special populations, teachers, as well as career and transition services. These positions were not, or I say these slots were not filled last year. So it was certainly a added benefit to the committee to have input from those specific representatives to the work that we were doing. And we appreciate FCPS giving the flexibility for those individuals to participate in our monthly meetings. In addition to what you have read in the annual report, I just have a summary here of the committee activities. This was the first year we actually, or I should say, conducted a new member orientation. We had several new members, thanks to new members coming to the board, and some members of the committee that had been on for a while resigned or stepped down. So with that, there was a conversation during our September meeting that those individuals sort of wanted to get some history, some background on the things that the committee had been doing. As you can imagine, we have a very short timeline with which to do our work, and they wanted to get up to speed as soon as possible. Alexa and I had talked about the idea of the orientation on numerous occasions, so it was very fitting that this year, early in October, actually held a virtual orientation for the new members, where we went over the purpose of the advisory committee, the history behind a lot of the recommendations that we had given in the past, recent changes that had taken place in the CTE program, and also provided them insight into the work that we were going to be doing throughout the next year, and why their role and the background that they had was important to the work that we were doing. I did receive feedback from those attendees that it was very helpful, and they had anticipated and hoped that this would be something that could be done in future meetings, and I've shared with the new leadership that they may want to consider having new member orientations moving forward. Typically each year, we also do an endorsement of new courses. I should have taken this bullet out because I did talk to Whitney, and the school district did not present endorsements of new courses this year, but I know that that's always a part of our agenda in the early part of the year, but she did confirm there were no new courses added. However, the one thing that did take place was the endorsement of the 2021-22 Perkins budget request, as well as you may have heard from the last committee, I took it upon myself to actually give presentations to the Minority Student Achievement Oversight Committee, the Title I Parent Advisory, the FCPS Ambassadors Program, and the Northern Virginia District PTA. As you can imagine, during the COVID, there were a lot of virtual presentations going on. So I received invitations from each one of these groups to come and talk about the work of the CTAC and why it was important for their specific stakeholders to understand the value and benefits of the CTE program. And you may have, of course, seen in the last presentation, and you may have heard through your own community channels, that there has been a lot of talk about the need to expand those CTE offerings, as the school board member had indicated, to all parts of the county, as well as ensuring that parents and materials that are distributed actually communicate the program in such a way that folks are aware of those offerings and can easily sign up. And you'll see some of that discussion come out a little bit more in our recommendations. So once again, this year we broke into subcommittees. Again, like every other committee, we worked virtually throughout the entire year when we were face-to-face. It was very important for us because we have such a large committee to kind of break down some of the work that the committee does into these subcommittee structures. This year, we focused on program resource gaps, communications and outreach, as well as program accessibility and content delivery. I certainly can't speak to everything that each one of these subcommittees did, but if you read the annual report, I did a better job of sort of outlining and bulleting what the output was of each of these. But at a high level, I myself was a member of the program Resource Gaps, and we looked at analyzed labor market data and research from the NOVA Workforce Division and compared that to CTE course enrollment to determine where there may be gaps where we see large growth around certain occupations, but not necessarily large growth in engagement and enrollment at the CTE programs. In addition, that data is appended to our annual report, and you'll see that we have a chart of the CTE enrollment, and there's a chart that was created that shows you the numbers as they are mapped to the occupationals, the top occupations in the Northern Virginia region. Next was the communications and outreach. This particular subcommittee looked at how the school division was actually getting word out about the CTE program. And they reviewed and sort of had conversations around current activities focused on educating parents and community stakeholders about the CTE program. There was sort of some cross work between this committee as well as the program accessibility, because it all focused on reaching out to the PTAs, having conversations with the counseling staff, as well as ways that other community groups and organizations can be engaged to help spread the word, but then also help support the school district in developing after school as well as summer learning opportunities that give students greater exposure to the CTE program. Next was program accessibility and content delivery. And this specific subcommittee researched how CTE is communicated and promoted specifically at the middle school level across different regions. So they used anecdotal data that they were able to find from the middle school websites. Some of them had conversations with middle school counseling staff, and others just basically used what they knew about their own regions based on their participation in the PTA and other community groups to identify best practices and then discover possible inequities across those, across the specific regions as it pertains to how CTE is communicated to the parents. And a subset of their work, again, this committee was busy. We only meet once a month, and that doesn't include December and January. They also slid in time to discuss how the CTE program was pivoting to adapt to the virtual learning. So there were a couple meetings where they got briefings from Whitney and other staff members about how all the programs were pivoting to virtual learning and the impact that that was having on students learning, not only learning, but also access to certifications that would need to be passed. And those students who are participating in more hands-on programs like the Fire Academy and construction, how those programs were adapting to ensure those students were engaged and received proper credit for their enrollment in those programs and courses. The next two slides will basically summarize what our recommendations were based on all of the work. Again, in the annual report, there's more specifics around this. So I gave you the high level of what those specific groups did, but I think the recommendations kind of flesh out what our findings were and where there's need for continued growth and support to the CTE program to address inequities or potential inequities, as well as other areas for enhancing support for the program as it continues to grow and seek new participation from students across the entire school division. So I won't read sort of quote unquote line for line, but recommendation one, the topic of how it's communicated and consistent messaging keeps coming up over and over. This is, I think, a sort of different variation of the recommendation we've given about 2 or 3 years in a row about how the program is actually communicated to the communities. We've received a lot of feedback from the groups that I spoke to that I told you about, where they talked about having materials about the CTE program translated into other languages, opportunities for presentations such as town halls or information sessions around the CTE program that can be held in all the regions, particularly at the elementary and middle school level, and not necessarily in high school when students have already committed to a specific track. And there are other examples there that we have pushed and recommended that I know the CTE department has heard us talk about before and are working with their internal and external stakeholders to develop social media campaigning around the program and ensuring that. I know a couple of years back, there was a constant communication about the CTE program through Keep in Touch. So expanding those so that it reaches, again, the largest audience, and also investing time into potentially doing division-wide information sessions, the committee has heard and believes would sort of support this need to expand how the program is communicated across all regions and all communities. Recommendation number 2 talks about expanding resources and learning experiences focused on highlighting the connection between regional occupational outlooks and CTE programs. If you look at the data, I'm not a statistician, but it wasn't difficult to see that there are certain occupations that are growing significantly in our region and have been highlighted by workforce boards, the Virginia government and other folks around the nation, but that does not necessarily seem to translate to enrollment in those courses within the CTE program. And of course, there are a number of factors that go into that as far as, the size and how many students can be enrolled in a particular course. We didn't dive into those details, but I think the new committee leadership has already talked about sort of taking more of a deep dive into those numbers and ensuring that if we are trying to prepare the student population for careers, for access to college in these high demand fields, then there certainly has to be more of a robust effort to ensure that enrollment matches that so that the workforce demands are being met. And that's also communicated to parents and others when students are thinking about which courses they're going to take and what they're going to enroll in. And we sort of did give a nod to the fact that we're not trying to sway students away from the particular career paths that they may have a desire and interest in pursuing, but it goes without saying that if the goal is to place them into high demand career fields and fill the pipeline of employment opportunities in the region, that there has to be, of course, increased emphasis placed on the courses and that the county has invested money in, such as IT and STEM and robotics and other programs that I think were highlighted in the report, as you see, that don't necessarily correlate to the demand that's in the workforce. And that is across all the programs. That's not necessarily just the ones that are technical in nature, but I think the data that we showed clearly shows that there's a need to enhance that across all. And also think about which programs may need to be sort of tailored or cut back. We're not necessarily advocating doing away with programs, but there may need to be a sort of shift in resources toward reskilling teachers to be able to teach courses that are more in demand and give them that professional development so that the school district can meet the need for those courses once the word gets out that there is a demand for those. Recommendation number 3 speaks to the committee's desire for the school central office staff and teachers to collaborate with industry professionals to update course descriptions to include language that reflects current industry and career terminology. I know that this one was a personal passion of mine as we were doing research and talking to schools and the committees that I mentioned to you about the courses and what's being offered. There's clearly a disconnect with the language, whether it's being borrowed from standard language that comes from the state, or if it's something that's done internally. There's a need to ensure that industry, I won't call them buzzwords, they're just industry terminology around certain technologies, certain skills and knowledge that should be infused in those courses so that folks have a better understanding of what students are being exposed to. So if you have a course in programming or coding, as we would call it, you actually call out those coding languages that are being taught and just don't say we're teaching coding, but we're teaching Java or we're teaching SQL, things that folks in industry and parents in the community may understand and recognize as being valuable skill sets just based on their own interaction in the workplace. The other reason why this is important is because it ensures consistent learning across all the regions and classrooms. If you make the description generic, someone could be teaching one thing at one school and someone teaching another based on teacher skill sets or just desire of what they want to teach. But if we're able to infuse those industry and career terminologies, in that lexicon, we'll see that there's of course, consistent way that those courses are taught and that curriculum is developed so that every student is getting the same access to the same knowledge and skill sets across the school division. And then last but not least, investigating the feasibility of expanding access to Naviance to 6th grade students. That was something that the committee was a real champion behind. This came out of that group that was looking into how CTE is promoted at the middle school level. And we did also get this feedback from the Title I Parent Advisory Committee that information about CTE and courses and what that means as far as how students are mapping out their career interest through Naviance should start in the 6th grade. Because by the time, of course, they're in the 7th grade or students who may be entering the 9th grade, there's a lot of loss of information and knowledge that would be helpful as they're thinking about their course sequences, particularly for those programs that require a prerequisite or combined a session 1 course with a session 2 in order to earn some type of career credential or certification. And if you aren't armed with that knowledge early enough, you will not have the opportunity to then be able to take advantage of that because you didn't have the information. So expanding that access to Naviance to the 6th grade is something the committee feels very strongly about. And I think as we spoke with folks from the counseling staff, they said this was something that they're already investigating and looking into as they're continuing to address the number of recommendations we have given over the last couple of years. So this is a new slide. It's new because in years past, I was always going to be the new chair. But I thought I would highlight the fact that I am passing the mantle this year after 8 years on this committee and 4 as the chair. I am passing the baton to Mr. Joseph Parker with Into STEM, who's been a committee member for the last 3 or 4 years, has been elected the new chair of the committee. The committee's new vice chair will be Irvin Verconi, who is in the supply chain operations education space. Both of them have been members of the committee for quite some time and have the full support of the membership, have a good vision for where they would like to take the committee. There was certainly a vibrant conversation following our last meeting about what the charge will look like and the things that they would like to tackle in the new school year with the support of the school board. So I think the committee, as well as the central office staff, are excited about the relationships that they will build with these 2 individuals as they continue to push forward the work of the advisory committee. Again, it's been, as I explained to them, it's been a pleasure working with all of them. And I'm just excited that we do have individuals who are just as energetic and passionate about the CTE program as I am to continue the work that we're doing to make this one of the best, or if not the best, CTE programs in the region. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you, Charles, not only for this excellent presentation, but more importantly for the many years of service to our community, not only as the chair of the CTE Advisory Committee, but also with your work with Northern Virginia Community College and other organizations here in Northern Virginia. We are forever grateful. So thank you. I am now, go ahead.
No, I say it's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. I've known you for many years. I'm now going to call on board members so that they can provide comment. Ms. Marin, followed by Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Britt. I thoroughly enjoyed this presentation. And again, having been to the construction site yesterday for the Foundation for Applied Technical Education, I am really jazzed about this. So what stands out to me about your report is, it's curious to me, having been on the board for 1.5 years, that I'm seeing all this data about the offerings through an advisory committee. Because I really think that this should come from staff, from instructional services during the course of the year or during budget work. So, that's a curious thing for me. What I'm hearing from tonight and what I've heard from the board colleagues and constituents and students and staff is that we need more career focused learning. But I think that we need to clarify the definition of career and technical ed and what the goals are. Because for me, I think of CTE largely as an alternative pathway from a 4-year college that helps students even get fast tracked onto credentialed work soon after high school, and whether that's upon graduation or with 1 or 2 years. Yet I see the opportunities in the report that, to my knowledge, would require someone to obtain a 4-year degree or more. And that's fine and could be desirable to have options like that, like engineering or marketing. But the school division needs to be really clear about this and the intention of what's offered, and as it's advertising these experiences, because it's worthy to have students sample different occupations. But if this is students like almost, career path, I don't want to say lifeline, but if this is their way to make their way in life, it can't just be this smattering of nice to try things. It has to be real intentional. What are we doing to help students who are not going to do that 4-year career path? Secondly, we need to expand these offerings. We have about 58,000 high school students. And in some of these programs, we have handfuls of students in them. And in several cases, only 1 location for a type of study. And that's just not okay for FCPS. I think the model of how we offer CTE has got to change to allow for more interest. And I've heard, barriers and things that need to be addressed, including we likely, need to add central office staff, or we can pick your central office staff to manage partnership and programs. We have to have space and compliance with OSHA, of course. We need communications and marketing to inform students of opportunities, yes, and transportation. But, yesterday I saw these amazing houses, and a common refrain was, well, there's no more new space. We don't have any space left in the county to build. well, let's think of it differently. Let's find ways to partner. Could we, when we issue RFPs to do updates and renovations on our FCPS buildings, could part of that RFP be that the contractor has to allow for us to do some construction and CTE work? And of course, all this is going to have to be done safely, but I think we really need to be way more creative and way more expansive with this, and that's got to come through in the budget. And I just want to say, lastly, my 2 minutes, my 1 second, I think it's up. Darn it! But that'll have to be for that. It was an administrative thing for the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Does Mr. Britt or
really, I'd like to hear the staff. I
was about to offer that, Ms. Marin. I was just about to ask whether or not Ms. Kittledge wanted to answer. Thank you. So first, Mr. Britt, and then Ms. Kittledge.
Yeah, well, I'd really like to hear if Dr. Presidio's on, or Ms. Klemenko. I'd like to hear one of the leadership team members of ISD, please.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. So with that, Dr. Presidio?
Well, I think, Ms. Marin, you raise a lot of really good questions and a lot of really good points, and I can't really address them all right now. A couple of things I would say, though, just for board members to know that we do have these issues on our agenda and are working on many of them right now. So, for example, we are doing a study with an external consultant of our CTE programs. We've completed the RFP for that, and we'll be working to collect more stakeholder feedback about equity and access to our programs, looking at the programs that we do offer in terms of alignment to really labor and industry trends and developments, and looking at national models of best practice. But overall, I would just say one thing to keep in mind is that our career and technical education programs are very, very broad in scope, right? So, we have, programs from cosmetology to carpentry, right? And to cybersecurity. So our programs are really built around the national model of career academies, and there are essentially 16 different areas of career academies. So we have very broad programs, and I do think that the intent of the study that we're doing is to bring some information to the board and to the community for us to, do a comprehensive review of the program offerings that we have in Fairfax County, and see if there, is a possible need to refresh some of our programming, and also to really talk about, the longstanding equity challenge of making our programs more available and more accessible to students across the county. So that work will be work that we'll do with the community and with the board next year. I certainly would be happy to address more specific questions, but I see other board members have their hands up, and I don't know, in the interest of time, maybe I would just leave it at that to start.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. Mr. Britt, do you want to respond? And I also want to call everybody's attention that Ms. Glazier is here, and she is oversees the CTE department.
I'll just add by, similarly as Dr. Presidio said, because of the breadth of the programs, it does take sort of this work that he talked about. The committee had been recommending years ago that there be some more additional studies done on the program to ensure that the programs that are meeting workforce and labor demands are the ones that are growing, and that the resources applied to those. It is, as she stated, the CT program nationally is a pathway to both college and career. It's not just to folks who are not going to college, it's for folks that also are going to college that have opportunities to go there. So when you think about who needs to hear about it, who needs to learn and be involved, it is a larger group that may not necessarily be getting that information today. So I certainly agree with the comments, and excited to see or learn in the future about what the study finds about how the program could be sort of further enhanced and tailored to make sure that it is meeting the needs of the school district without necessarily having 17,000 programs across 16 schools, but more so focusing on 8 programs that could really provide added benefit to not only the school district, but the community as a whole.
Thank you, Mr. Britt. I'm going to go on to Ms. Cohen.
Thank you so much. Well, we are really going to miss you on CTAC. I feel really lucky to have gotten to serve with you. We all voted best chair, and the report was awesome. And as Melanie said, I think so full of so much information that is incredibly helpful to us as we go forward And we're really appreciative of that. I think a few things, nothing new. I think you probably fall in the same camp that I do, that it's a little bit frustrating to see year after year some of the same recommendations, but I'm super excited to find out about the program review. I think placement is a really big issue. We've all had this conversation, I think, pretty continually as a board of looking at where programs are placed and do they make sense where they are, or do we need to expand access? What is the limiting factor here? If it is really that we need like Boeing to come in and do some massive lab, like got it. If it's just that we need some space and a teacher and there are some barriers, then I think, one of the things I hope that we'll look at is maybe some additional collaboration with the county. We talk a lot about county spaces and Fairfax County having, some office buildings and spaces that are empty. And so maybe there's a way for us to reimagine some of our spaces, because I think it's highly unlikely, as you said, that we're going to wind up with like a brand new Chantilly Academy type program, somewhere else in the county. So trying to be creative on that is a big one. And the other thing, just speaking to the placement as well and availability, the idea that in so many parts of the county that our kids would have to give up 3 class periods to be able to access these opportunities. And we're certainly that way in my part of the county, to be able to go and access any of these. And they're just outstanding. And I agree with you. It's the same conversation we've had again of trying to expand the information so kids know what is available. And I do feel like, particularly with our SPED kids, at least the way that our, current school counselors are working, I don't think that we're hearing as much as some kids who are already going to be getting all kinds of opportunities tend to know more about these opportunities. And I think that's a shame. I think we need to do a better job of getting that information out, because they are just unbelievable. It's amazing to me that you can walk out with certifications or this new lease on life in a direction as you walk into college that has become so incredibly expensive. To have a direction walking in is pretty remarkable. One thing I would say though, and I hope the program review is as you said, tying in what we're offering, what businesses really need right now to fulfill the workforce. So thank you again. You guys are amazing, and we're always excited to have you come present. And best of luck, Charles.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Does anybody want to provide a response to that? I think Dr. Presidio, given the comment about the review and whether or not that review will also look at availability in different regions and accessibility for different groups.
Yeah, it will. And, I would say that's not the only, partnership that we have looking at some of these issues. We also do work pretty closely with Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason University and the county looking at workforce trends. And we actually have a meeting coming up with them to do some of this collaboration work in just another week. So we can continue to, to try to do a better job briefing the board on that work.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. And I would also hope that we bring in the Economic Development Authority as well. Dr. Anderson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Like my colleagues before me, Mr. Red, I do want to say thank you for this very comprehensive report. It was quite interesting to go through much of this data that is here. And I'm sure many of the points that you've shared with us will be incorporated in the program review, which staff is also going to be working on. I just really want to echo my support in terms of some of your recommendations, which is the expansion of programs and areas of the county where our students can most likely have access to them. I think that's imperative so that we have students who have opportunity. And so I'm really looking forward to see some of your response to that as well, Dr. Presidio, when we have that program review. I do have one question. I believe it's in the executive summary. You talked a little bit about the use of CARES Act funds to help with the resources and to fast track implementation. Can you be a little bit more specific in terms of what is it that the committee is thinking about when it comes to this budgetary implication?
So the idea came from the newly elected, it started with the newly elected Vice Chair Irving regarding opportunities for students to get additional hands-on training or hands-on learning that they may not have received virtually during the school year. So if there are courses that are going to be offered or certainly summer learning opportunities, that those funds be used to sort of maybe curtail the cost of the teachers or the cost of the space that maybe students may have been charged or may not have charged. I don't know. I mean, that's something I know that you all are working on, how that summer learning is going to look. But if those funds were available, the committee's belief was that some of that should be allotted toward addressing that loss of learning that happened because of the virtual learning, where students that are in the hands-on did not get that or may need it in order to study and pass the certification tests that are associated with it, because some of them do come with hands-on requirements that you have so many hours of that. So if that's needed, that funding could be used to support that. And then in addition, on a broad perspective, I believe the committee's belief was that if there are costs or barriers that have prevented the CTE department from implementing recommendations that we have presented in the past, that maybe some of this money could be used to help fund those things. I mean, we often hear that there are resource issues, which, working in, the private sector and government space, we totally understand. All times recommendations come, they sometimes come with needs for resources. So this is what the committee felt was an opportunity, that if there are going to be, discretionary funds that could be spent, maybe it could be used to address some of these systemic challenges that the district is having, to expand the program and increase the communication that's going out about the program if cost has been a prohibitor in the past.
No, thank you. I very much appreciate that comprehensive response, which leads me to a question for Dr. Presidio. I'm not sure if we had some in-depth conversation in terms of how we are going to recoup that learning loss for students and programs that do require the hands-on practicum. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of what our plans are? Maybe I've missed it.
Well, and I would say, we're still continuing to, well, let me say it this way. We're looking at a long-term approach to address learning loss for students. So not just focusing on what's going to happen this summer, but focusing on what we can do to continue to support students next school year outside of the regular school day, and even in probably to the following summer and the following school year. So we're really taking a longer-term view at this. For those students that did need support for some of those certification exams, we've been try to make sure that they have that additional support even before the school year wrapped up, and we'll continue to try to do that during the summer. So we really are working with students on a individual student by student basis to make sure that they get the support that they need. Some of it has to be now, some of it has to be immediate, but we're really also looking at a longer term view and approach to that support.
Okay, thank you. I'm very glad to hear that. The only other piece that I have is, how are we communicating to parents that this is available for students to reach out to on a case-by-case basis? Who are they reaching out to? Somebody centrally, at the school?
No, at the school level, teachers and counselors and administrators have been working with individual students really for the last several months to this end. And we did make, and again, the other thing just to remind folks in the community is that our summer programs are all free. There's not a charge this year. There are some enrichment programs that are charging tuition, but even in those programs, we created scholarship opportunities for students to make sure that students did have opportunities to participate in those enrichment camps free of charge.
Thank you very much. The last thing that I wanted to point out, I chuckled a little bit when I saw recommendation 4, which is to expand access to Naviance to 6th grade students, when this was a conversation that we had with the prior committee report from TPAC. Again, Mr. Brett, thank you so much for this wonderful work. This was very comprehensive and very thorough. We're very grateful for all of your service, and best of luck to you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for your service as well.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. Ms. McLaughlin.
Happy to follow Dr. Anderson. First, Charles, thank you for your service as well. I also want to give a shout out to my Braddock District appointee, Alexa Prezell, who I know served as your vice chair. And also shout out to our own board member, Karen Corbett-Sanders. I heard really great things, Karen, about your work this year as a liaison. Very, very helpful, very hands-on. And a shout out also to Whitney, who I was told she stepped in for long-serving staff member Beth Downey, that Whitney did a great job. So Dr. Presidio, you've brought a good team together on this work to support our appointees. Cannot emphasize enough what board members have said about the experts here in our community serving on CTE. And Charles, thank you for capturing something very important that for 9 years, I know our board's been talking about, which is what is CTE? And it really is career and technical. It is meant to serve every single child, regardless of where their career education path is going to take them. So I thought you captured that really well. And we do need to keep growing it. As the parent of 2 recent college grads, I know that data science, cyber security, a lot of the computer science fields. We need to do better in FCPS to really expose kids sooner, earlier to what Ms. Cohen said. Here in the Braddock District, right next to Springfield, we really don't have enough curriculum options. And as Ms. Marin has talked about, how do we make sure that we get that access and that students aren't going to be having to give up 2 to 3 classes in order to access them. So I think we'll want to look at really the delivery model to it. But overall, I just am very grateful to everyone who served on CTEC this year and everything that you're doing to help us bring this to a 21st century learning model for our students. We know with the cost of going on to university, even students need exposure to careers. So I really second the notion that let's bring this down to the 6th grade level. Let's make sure that by the time they hit middle school, they can start taking these CTE electives and starting to understand where their passions lie. They could often spark their academic passion by getting exposure to, again, CTE level courses. But overall, I guess I would just say, Dr. Presidio, if you could make sure that your team works with our communications person, Helen Lloyd. I'd love to get the specific language about the summer enrichment camps and learning so that we can go ahead and send those out in our school board newsletters and make sure people don't miss the summer option. So do you know the registration deadline at all?
I believe the registration deadline actually might be passed. It's been open for several months, but I'll have to double check on that. And if it's not passed, we'll be happy to get that information out to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Tolan?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Charles, it's always good to see you. Yeah, I had to laugh when I saw the recommendation number 4 after the question I asked in the last session about Naviance and what it was and how we were using it, and would love to see that expanded and perhaps used as part of the educational tools for our communication tools for recommendation number 1. Very sensitive to how powerful the CTE courses can be. My younger son went all the way through FCPS and is currently a civil engineer, and could have benefited so much from some of the engineering courses offered at places like Marshall High School. But we didn't find out about it until it was too late, really, to plan for him to be able to take those courses and do the transportation and, have everything else he needed in order to, graduate and, go on to engineering school. So, very sensitive to that, and hope that we can do a little bit better with that because the opportunities are incredible. I did want to mention also earlier today, we were discussing our joint environmental task force goals, and we have a set of goals around workforce development. and working with CTE staff. Rachel Dahmer and Matt Bechtel are on our team looking at, and we'll be looking this summer at potential opportunities. I was very interested in the data and information that you collected around, what is our workforce really needing here in the geographic area, and what are we offering? And this is the kind of work they'll be adding. We could potentially add to your chart. So I just want to put that on your radar screen, that they'll be looking at careers in sustainability and renewables, and what is the demand here in Northern Virginia, and what is the student demand, and can we move forward in offering some courses, in that area as well. So just want you to think about that. Yesterday when I toured the house that the FATE program put together, had a great conversation with CTE staff there. And one of the things we were talking about was the great expansion of the entrepreneurship courses across the county. And so I said, wow, you really need to talk to our CTEC representatives. I mentioned in particular our Janesville representative, Juan Pablo Gonzalez, and his connections with, the venture capital community and entrepreneurs in the tech industry. And so, hope, that I see you guys as really great, potential teachers or real life people for our CTEC students to talk to. So anyway, thank you for your work. Really appreciate it.
Mr. Britt or Ms. Ketledge, would either one of you like to speak about how we would go about expanding the CTE to include the green careers that Ms. Tolan mentioned or referenced?
I'll defer to Whitney on this question.
Yeah, good evening. I'll also second all the third or fourth, all of the thank yous to Mr. Britt for all of his hard work this year and for welcoming me to the team. We have looked at quite a few courses that are available and coming from VDOE. There's a whole pathway and a new career cluster for power energy. And we're bringing on a new trade and industrial program manager very soon. So finding ways to connect all of the trade and industrial courses that we have, some of the IT courses that we have, technology education courses that we have, and pull in the power and energy and environmental elements into those courses, along with adding additional courses. So those will be part of our review of the occupational outlook and new course opportunities and new curriculum to add to our current courses coming this fall.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Would anybody else like to add to that, or shall we go on to Ms. Pekarsky? Okay, let's go on to Ms. Pekarsky. Thank you.
Just want to offer thank you, Mr. Britt, for your work and wonderful leadership on the committee, and for everyone's time and expertise. This is an incredible report, and I just found the data within it so helpful to me to really understand where a lot of these gaps are, and the discrepancies between high schools and who is accessing CTE offerings and who isn't. So I'm very much interested in what we will hear from leadership. I know Dr. Presidio is working on many of these issues, and this did come up in the prior committee, but the need for better communication, earlier communication, as you said, with Navion starting in 6th grade, and not only having the conversations, I think, with our students, but really broadening that and making sure that we are also bringing in our family, because I think sometimes there is that missing connection. And while our students may hear some of it in school, or they may get it from counselors, it doesn't click. There is not that long-term thought that really families can help solidify. So I'm very, very interested in the work that we can do as a division with, as Ms. Corbett-Sanders said earlier, that individualized approach for each student, because I mean, just beyond the opportunity to try different things, learn different things, I mean, our students can actually earn certificates and earn money. I mean, have a great paying job. That's regardless of whether or not they go to college afterwards. That's amazing. And we have to ensure that that is trickling down and people know that that is a real option in this, in our school system. So I'm very excited about a lot of the work that is happening and the recommendations that you have put forth. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. I'll take my turn just briefly because I've had the pleasure of working very closely with the CTE Advisory Committee over the past year as its liaison. Just a couple of comments. I do think that you're highlighting or your focus on the importance of early and more frequent communications is appropriate, and also changing the lexicon to be updated with the terminology that professionals are using in today's workforce, I think is critical, as well as the Naviance. And I'm just hoping that the not only the availability of Naviance is earlier age, but also that it's multilingual communications. So it's not limited to just English, because I've had the benefit of speaking at a couple of our non-English speaking PTAs. And when I raise the availability of the CTE programs, they are always very receptive and also very surprised at the availability of all that is available. So I encourage that we do that. And before I close out this portion of our work session, I also want to thank staff and thank Mr. Britt for including this robust amount of data in this report. It is only with data that we can have informed decision-making, and sharing data with our advisory committees, even if it doesn't reflect everything we'd like it to reflect, is critical so that we can get the best advice from our advisory committees in the form of their recommendations. But it also is essential for us as board members to be able to do the work that we do. So I encourage you, Dr. Brabrand, to make sure that in the future, we continue to not only make the data available to the advisory committees, but also share it with the board.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Mr. Britt, you're certainly welcome to join us for this next part of this session, where we will talk about adult and community education. And we are very lucky to have this year's chair of the ACE Advisory Committee, Brian Graham, with us this afternoon, or this evening now, as well as Ms. Williams, who is the staff liaison to the advisory committee, and that's Karen Williams. And I am also, would be remiss if I didn't also welcome Lois Passman today to this meeting as the long-serving appointee from the Mount Vernon District. And so, Brian, you guys have done some incredible work, and there's a lot of overlap between the work that you all are doing and the work that that the CTE Advisory Committee has done, as well as the work of earlier TPAC. And so I hand the microphone over to you, and I hope they've given you the privilege of sharing your presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Yes, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, thank you. I'd also like to point out that the CTE Vice Chair Irvin Varconi from the Providence District is also present, as well as Ken Balbuena, who is the appointee from the Braddock District as well, in addition to Ms. Lois Passman. So thank you for that introduction. I will share my screen, or make an attempt to at least. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to go just through a kind of a reset. I think most of the members of the school board are aware that there are kind of two portions that are under advisement from the Adult and Community Education Advisory Committee, areas that are funded by the ACE Fund, but also areas that are funded by the School Operating Fund. So just wanted to point out and remind members of the school board about the difference, that the Adult High School Completion Program that's on the top right of this graphic here is from the School Operating Fund, but the Community Education and Adult ESOL components of ACE are funded from the ACE Fund, so a separate fund that receives a transfer from the School Operating Fund each year. So just a reminder, as questions about finances and things like that kind of come through that, a lot of the operating costs and things like that are for Adult ESOL and Community Education are run through the ACE Fund and not through the School Operating Fund. And just to very, very quickly remind folks about the things that are in these areas. Community education has some K-12 programs, career development programs, which is a connection to tie into what we just heard from CTE, and adult enrichment programs as well, right? So there are obviously the driver education, the behind the wheel, I think all of you would be familiar with, and there are some ACE components as well with test prep, although a test prep for various tests, kind of classes that bridge the gap from one grade level to another for helping prepare students for the next level in math. And then of course, some K-12 world language programs. A lot of those K-12 programs did not happen this year or started kind of very late because of COVID. And a lot of the other programs didn't happen or happened in kind of new and different online delivery methods compared to a lot of the in-person delivery that we saw from community education in the past. Adult ESOL is also a huge important component of this. Of course, the school system is required to have an adult ESOL program, but there are there's teaching of practical English skills. There are tie-ins to important skills for workplace readiness, which are tie-ins to some of the funding from the grants. And then it's just always important to remind everyone that ACE for FCPS it administers the grant kind of regionally. So FCPS gets $1 million of the $2.3 million for the kind of regional grant. So which includes Loudoun and Prince William, and Arlington, Alexandria, and the Manassas systems. And then finally, adult high school completion. I think you all are aware of the Fairfax County Adult High School and the options to earn a diploma, either advanced standard or adult diploma, depending on kind of how the requirements are met. And then also the opportunity to earn an equivalency credential through the GED. So just quick refresher on what we're talking about here. The school board's charge this year was to talk, or for us to assess, to the advisory committee, was for us to assess how community education, adult ESOL, and adult high school completion, those three components, can be better positioned to serve the lifelong learning needs given the new learning environment necessitated by COVID-19. So, of course, we at this point all of our meetings were virtual because we had the impact of the coronavirus. So, as a result of that, we did kind of internal discussions about what information we needed to gather to understand how well we're doing this, and we kind of decided to focus on the digital divide as an important component. A lot of ACE programs are meant to be kind of easy to access, not inexpensive, but also can provide similar credentials and things that can turn into real money-making opportunities for Fairfax County residents. So reflecting how well did we reflect the needs of those things? We created surveys for ACE instructors and for adult students to kind of ask how they thought things were going, whether or not they were still able to teach their classes in COVID, or whether they didn't really adapt to COVID. and also kind of whether or not students and teachers preferred those methods, whether they thought that there was better engagement or not. And Ken Balbuena from the Bragg District is invited today because he did a lot of the analysis, statistical analysis as a result of that. So if we do have questions, that's kind of an appendix to our report, but there is some real data that the advisory committee created in addition to some of the data that we've been able to see from staff over the year as well. And then we've obviously in our meetings had discussions with staff about how the programs were adapting to in responding to COVID-19. I think just generally speaking, we felt like the high school completion programs, especially with their access to or being able to provide computers or to students, it adapted like everyone else in terms of providing virtual learning and actually had a fairly successful year. So the recommendations that we have today are not focused on the high school completion program because we didn't see dramatic kind of issues or concerns there. We hope to kind of do a more critical look at the high school completion program, all three programs next year as well. So just a note. Another. The ACE community adult ESOL programs did pivot to online classes, but did not collect enough revenue from the tuition to cover all fixed costs. We have kind of issues where we don't have the same access to K-12 programs in terms of providing laptops and internet and reliable internet to students. So there certainly there was kind of a mix of new opportunities for students who now had access to classes where they would have to drive across the county or whatever else because now they're offered virtually. And also students who you might have lost of opportunities because they didn't have a good enough computer or reliable internet or whatever. But there were students that were taking classes on iPads and phones and all kinds of things in addition to laptop computers. So finding ways to adapt through that was interesting. If we have more questions, more specific questions about the survey, and the results, we'd be happy to entertain them later. But just to be brief, I do want to get into the recommendations. The first recommendation that we have is to consider additional coronavirus relief funding to enable ACE to restore previous programs moving toward full in-person classes while maintaining a virtual option. So I think this recommendation also, because it was originated by Mr. Varconi as an idea, as you see from CTN here. But I think the justification here, obviously, is we had some programs that were not able to keep running. So to kind of maintain some momentum, that a little kickstart from some of the CARES Act funds or maybe elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds from the American Rescue Plan Act could potentially be used to maintain some resources and programs to help kind of fill in some of the gaps that were here, and kind of kickstart things that were interrupted from the pandemic, because not all of the programs and offerings were able to continue during that virtual period. So that is generally our first recommendation. And I guess it kind of related to that, there are if there are ways to add an emphasis on continuing education requests for the legislative appropriation packages, I think that there's a good tie-in, obviously, to what the ACE programs offer. Recommendation 2 is to ask the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors for direct funding of the ACE fund to demonstrate support of ACE program alignment with the One Fairfax policy and the draft Fairfax County strategic plan. So I know the strategic planning kind of got interrupted, but obviously there are a lot of ties to kind of equity programs through ACE. ACE has, I think the committee thinks, clear value for the county in general. If the county is saying that these things are important, if lifelong learning or education and learning is important, if providing residents with new economic opportunities, and empowerment and support for residents facing vulnerability. We see that ACE programs kind of fit into a lot of these areas. And instead of asking for FCPS operating fund to pay for some of these things and for them to be kind of put up against the core mission of FCPS, so that is K-12 education, we thought there might be some willingness for the school board, for the Board of Supervisors to directly fund some of these things from the county budget as well. So both the first two recommendations are kind of money related, and if we get into questions about that, there is, because of the downturn in courses, in enrollments, in revenue related to those things, but also because there is a kind of a base level of staff that is necessary to kind of maintain the program. There is going to be, a gap in there that we need to find some way to resolve in the funding. The next recommendation is recommendation 3, which is to continue to support virtual and hybrid instruction as a desirable class format using data-driven decision-making to determine which programs can sustain enrollment and generate revenue as ACE adjusts to a post-pandemic academic setting. So a lot of the virtual class offerings that we kind of switched to during the pandemic era were new experiments for ACE. A lot of classes were never provided or offered that way. Most of them were offered in person. So we think that there's kind of a balance in some students feel like they learn better this way, or that this provides them an opportunity to learn something while they're at home dealing with their children or whatever else, right? So there is kind of an access component that this is open new opportunities. So we think that this is a way to kind of continue to maintain some revenue or potentially increase the revenue that's run through the ACE fund by continuing to offer some of these programs in virtual formats, or maybe some in-person lab formats with virtual instruction or whatever. If you look at the new I think the program's really already doing this. If you go look at the latest ACE catalog, it talks about how we have classes in person, but we also have classes hybrid, and we have fully virtual and even self-paced options as well. So I think they are really embracing that, but we do want to see kind of data pushing the adoption of those things, the selection of offerings as well. The fourth recommendation is to implement a curriculum that expedites the completion of ACE career pathways, providing opportunities that allow students to pursue specialized skills. I think this is kind of a follow-on from a recommendation that we had last year in terms of identifying what I think we called career pathways. But there are a lot of growth areas in Northern Virginia that require credentials and certifications. If we can find easier ways to connect members of the community with these offerings to seek employment in these high demand field areas as quickly as possible without having to take several years of classes to do that, that I think that is an important increased focus that we can. And my understanding is that this is also potentially in the works from staff as well. And then our last recommendation is to expand outreach to to community leaders, local human services organizations, and county agencies to increase the impact of ACE programs and inform the work of the advisory committee. So previously, the advisory committee had, last year, the advisory committee had asked for the advisory committee to be expanded. And there was some discussion. I know we've been kind of talking around how advisory committees work and engage with the community just in general. But we did spend some time talking about organizations that we thought would be good to reach out to. And we had kind of an experiment where we had invited the United Community from the Mount Vernon Lee areas at Lois Passman's urging to a meeting and we formed a connection between those between the organizations. So United Community now kind of understands, and we understand what the United Community is dealing with, and they understand some of the offerings that ACE has, and it kind of, as just in this short period of time, this happened a couple months ago, we already have a number of students that are enrolled in ACE courses for certification as a result of that. So we have some in the pharmacy technician and some in the certified nursing assistant courses. So we think that was really great, but I think we view this as an opportunity for staff and the advisory committee to engage with the diverse groups of Fairfax County that are helping to support vulnerable populations and help connect people to new career opportunities. So we look for the school board support in continuing to do that. Just really to wrap things up, we know that adult learning programs are important to Fairfax County. ACE is not just adult learning programs, though. It also has K-12 support as well. Equity really is at the core of the education that is provided by all three of the program components of ACE, and we feel like with One Fairfax and with other discussions that have happened that there is a kind of a clear need for ACE. So all we're really asking for is continued support to help drive for maintenance and growth of ACE programs. And the challenges that we had over the last year with some programs interrupted, we'll need some financial support for continuance in relaunching. So I think that wraps up my presentation, and I will give the floor back to you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you for all of your hard work and the hard work of the whole committee this past year, because I know you have brought a lot of innovative thought and approaches to the work. We do have a couple of board members who would like to speak. I'm going to start with Mr. Frisch.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Graham and Mr. Verconi, both Providence District residents. So welcome to the meeting tonight. One of the areas that I'm particularly interested in hearing a little bit more about is the first recommendation and leaning into the virtual or hybrid option. I imagine when community colleges began very heavily pushing students toward, or adults towards virtual online instruction, that there was probably a hesitancy by those who had always gone the traditional route. What advantages do you see by the school division? What advantages do you see with the school division leaning heavily into maintaining a virtual option? And I can't tell from the recommendation, maybe this is something I missed, whether this would be like a concurrent hybrid situation, or would we offer both in-person and virtual versions of the same classes?
Right. So I think thank you for the question. I think that in the past, the ACE programs have kind of operated from if there's enough enrollment, then they'll run a class model. There aren't loss leaders. They like classes really only run if they have enough enrollment, right? So if a class is close to enrollment, they'll spend time kind of trying to push, trying to either through social media or whatever else, past students trying to connect people to opportunities, right? So I think really the idea is that they can offer both and kind of let market forces decide, right, whether or not students want to continue virtual instruction or whether or not they want to go back to in-person. Obviously, some like adult ESOL doesn't especially with kind of the beginning levels of adult ESOL, does not translate very well to online instruction. But the recommendation really is to encourage multiple channels, to provide options, to have the most flexibility, because we know Fairfax County is a large county. There's traffic if you're not close enough, or if you don't have a car or whatever else, like sometimes the computer is the equalizer that provides an opportunity. Whereas, if you're close enough to a place to be able to take a class, you might not be able to go if you don't have a car, or if it broke, or whatever else. So we view the virtual learning experience as a silver lining, as an opportunity, and we are encouraging, and it looks like the staff is embracing that as an opportunity to potentially offer more classes to more Fairfax County residents.
Well, and to that end, if there are programs and classes that are not best done online, there are clearly other classes that can be done entirely online and marketed properly. You could certainly amp up the number of slots available to students if there was significant interest, which would bring in significantly more funding for the operation. Beyond the course catalog that gets mailed out, how are we marketing these opportunities to the general public?
I think we might. I think I might want to let staff respond to that, and maybe respond to the previous question. There has been a growth on social media just from art, because we do have some discussions about marketing. The catalog
sharing
or
down paid, do you know? Sorry.
Not paid to my knowledge. But I could let Mr. Steiner or someone else kind of respond about marketing efforts better than I ever could.
Just to chime in.
Mr. Steiner.
Thank you. Just to chime in very quickly, all of our marketing on social media, it's all what I would call organic. We don't have any paid marketing at this time. So it's retweets, and I know a lot of school board members retweet us, and we really appreciate that support.
Well, I appreciate anyone who thinks that our retweets are as valuable as some might. I asked that question because technology has evolved a great deal over the last 10 years in how we can approach people, right? So, years and years ago, if you were a trial lawyer and you wanted to reach people, you would buy the back of the yellow pages for a full page ad, and that's what your marketing would be for the year, right? And if you're a trial lawyer who's still doing that, you're wasting your money, right? You're doing very strategic targeted advertising for far less than you ever paid to run your full page ad in the yellow pages. So when I think about all the data we have for families that have signed up for our ACE programming, that tells me that we know exactly the types of people to be targeting with digital advertising to sign up for these programs, especially programs that are online. Perhaps that's something worth exploring in a little bit more detail now that technology is so readily available.
And I'm sure Mr. Frisch will offer his expertise in this area to anybody in the ACE program office that would like it. Can we count on that, Mr. Frisch?
Sure. Happy to have the conversation.
I would just note that the staff is making an effort in this area. It appears, at least to our parents, in trying to understand kind of where web traffic is coming from and things like that, right? So I think there definitely is, and then there are there's information that we can look at based off of class information that comes through after people take the catalog and look at the catalog. The catalog is cheaper. I don't remember the exact numbers. Staff could tell us the exact numbers, right? But the catalog that they made and produced this year was way cheaper than it's ever been, and it's much more lean. It really kind of recommends or leans on sending people to the website to sign on or sign up for things. But it really kind of highlights some of the key opportunities that are made by the program.
And they also changed the paperweight so that it was cheaper for mailing. Dr. Anderson, please.
Thank you. It's at the end of the day, my voice is totally going. Mr. Graham, thank you so much. And thank you for the entire committee for all of this work. And definitely a major shout out to my representative, Ms. Jessica Strelitz, on her work on the committee. Recommendation number 1, where you talked about using some coronavirus relief funds to help support some of the efforts. Do you have ballpark any numbers that we can start to ponder, or staff? Can anyone provide what this may look like?
I don't know that the advisory committee does, maybe staff does, but I don't think we have a specific number in mind. I think the idea was that there might be some funds available that could help maintain some of the programs that were potentially lost during that time period.
Not to put anybody on the spot, but I remember at some point I saw a report, and maybe Jessica provided to me. It had the budget page. I can't put my hands on it, but maybe staff can provide some idea of what did it take to provide all of the options virtually this year, so we could get a sense of what this may mean when we're talking about how to disperse and use our ESSER funds. The other question that I have is, you talked quite a bit regarding the online options. Obviously, there's some convenience and feasibility for some of our participants who may not be able to get to an online class. I know that you also mentioned it earlier, that there was a survey that was distributed regarding the online offerings. Can you give a little bit more specificity regarding what the participants talked about as highlights or challenges of the online offerings?
Sure, and if Ken is amenable to this, I'd like to throw this to fellow member Ken Balbuena to talk about some of that. Of course, we can make the actual survey responses available to you as well. But
Mr. Graham, I appreciate it. I was just about to do the same thing. So, Mr. Balbuena.
All right, Dr. Anderson, thank you very much for your question. There was a student survey as well as a teacher survey. The instructor survey, it did have a little bit more meat, I would say, to the qualitative as well as the quantitative data. In terms of the qualitative, like some of the comments there, the comments were talking a lot about how some of the classes were not necessarily optimal for online instruction, and that reflected a lot of the data that they also said in the quantitative findings. Some of them talked a lot about that there may be a negative impact on the students, but they didn't really specify it too much. As far as the student survey goes, the comments on the student survey were mainly geared towards a small little error in one of the questions where they were asked to check all that applied, but they were not able to check all that applied. And then their other comments were really geared on how wonderful some of their instructors were. So there wasn't anything that was super informational about how an online format really impacted them. I would say that the quantitative data, however, did provide a lot of insight into that. And I'm happy to expand on that if you would like.
Oh, definitely. If you have anything that you could share with the board regarding those surveys, I think we would all appreciate having the opportunity to review the data that you spent considerable time collecting. I do have another question, and I'm not sure who this goes to, because earlier Brian shared that the options that would be provided next year, virtual, in person, and also a self-paced option. Was that also an option that was provided this year? And is that with or without an instructor?
I think, I don't know exactly when that was put into place, but I think Mr. Steiner probably could answer that question. I believe a lot of it is through a partnership, and the name of the company is failing me. So Mr. Steiner, please help.
Mr. Steiner?
Yes, we are using a vendor. Ed2Go is the vendor that provides actually a variety of online courses that are focused on career pathways and some enrichment courses. Primarily what we've been focused on at this point is career pathways. And they have a mix of offerings, from a self-paced course that would almost be like an online correspondence course, to something that is instructor supported, where a student could interface with an instructor, and then instructor led. And in our conversations with them, they are actually in the process of retooling their offerings and how they describe the self-paced versus instructor-led versus instructor-supported. So that nomenclature that I'm using with you is actually changing. So there's a variety of what we would call self-paced options. And in that, what we mean is generally a student would be able to choose, I'm free on a Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. That's when I'd want to take this course. So that's the option that we are extending to students, as opposed to we have a class Wednesday at 3 p.m. or 7 p.m., but you have to be there Wednesday at 7 p.m. So that is what we're extending to our students utilizing this vendor.
And did you find that participation was greater in those classes, or was it just fairly equitable with the classes that you offered that were teacher-led, that were the more traditional classes?
So at this point, I would describe participation as growing. We went through an RFP process that completed, and then staff has been implementing these Ed2Go courses in various ways. For example, it's very hard to find a networking or an IT instructor. So we are utilizing a lot of their network and IT courses to serve the need in the region. We are also looking at ways that we could improve upon our pathways, add subject matter to some of our career pathways that would help broaden or make sure that the opportunity for students is more concise and they can complete this, complete the career pathway in a more concise amount of time. So in terms of student participation in one or the other, at this point, it's still growing. And I really don't have a very large sample in one or the other to give you. In time, I will.
Well, I'm going to invite you to ponder on another question when we're talking about finances. I know every year we have this conversation because ACE does draw from the operating funds of FCPS. Which one of these options were the most budget friendly? Was it the Ed2Go offerings or the more traditional offerings that ACE provides?
That's a tough question. And I believe our finance manager she's probably listening in on this meeting also, and she may be able to chime in on this. But in terms of the best budget friendly options, I think we're looking at probably some virtual programming that we were able to run that maybe did not utilize some of our costs for building use. So building coordinators and other things like that, that we would have to incur if we are hosting classes on site. So those are most likely our budget friendly options. Also, with what we've learned from this is I can tell you that a virtual component of classes is something that we are always going to have going forward. Looking at our apprenticeship classes, which is a large section of our business, a hybrid option makes a lot of sense in terms of allowing someone to complete the pathway faster, access, because we offer in-person classes across the county, but traffic may be a barrier, location may be a barrier. So the virtual component is going to be something that we are going to utilize going forward, and that will change our financial model going forward. So that's, my answer is I think it's a hybrid component going forward, but I think virtual was probably our most cost-effective option thus far.
Okay, thank you. And my final question is regarding membership. I don't know if this is a question for you or for Brian. Can you speak to us a little bit in terms of what did membership look like during this COVID year as to compare to the years prior?
Just to clarify, membership of the advisory committee?
You mean I'm sorry, the participation, enrollment,
okay.
Thank you.
Oh, enrollment, there we go. I mean, enrollment is certainly down. I believe we have enrollment numbers in our report in an appendix. I would also add, Dr. Anderson, that kind of to your original questions, that the appendices include kind of statistical analysis and tables from the actual data that was generated from the reports as well. So there is more information in there. If you have kind of more specific questions about enrollment, I think we'd have to defer them to staff. But there is a report that came from staff as we looked at multiple reports from staff over the year as an appendix to the report.
Okay, thank you. I seem to be missing that page for some weird reason in what I printed. So I will definitely look for that.
Okay, if not, of course we can get it to you.
No, I see that it says it's on page 10, but my printout doesn't have page 10, oddly enough. So that's why I may be missing it. But thank you for all of the information and for all of the work. I'm very appreciative of this very difficult task that you had before you for this year, because we had the pandemic and that really impacted the participation of students in the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I now have Ms. Derenak-Kovacs and followed by Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Graham, and your entire committee for your hard work on this report. We appreciate this very much. I don't really have questions per se, but I have comments. I do think there have been many supporters of this adult programming for a long time, and we have struggled. And one of the things, how much to invest versus what we get in return. I think this is the opportunity for our community. And as a school system, we have a role to play within it. I do appreciate your recommendation number 5, to expand the outreach to community leaders, and also to asking the Board of Supervisors for more direct funding. Now, perhaps one way you could do this is I guess, so this is my question, have you ever approached the SCIPT committee? It's not particularly their charge, but your comment about reaching out to United Community, and the United Community, SCIPT, they are intertwined there. So have you reached out to that group at all and all their partners as to how this could be, you could develop more partnerships all at once there?
So a simple answer, no. It was recommended by Ms. Karen Corbett-Sanders at one of our meetings as our liaison, actually, in the last meeting or two of this year to do so. So I think it is something that is kind of on the agenda for subsequent meetings.
Yeah, because I think that's very important, because it's joint school. The leadership is joint school board members, community members. Ms. McLaughlin's hand is up. I see her shaking her head. Ms. Pekarsky are also. I was the liaison for many years. I stepped down this past year, but I think that would be very, very important. And I also think it is time for an investment somewhat. Word of mouth is not going to continue to be our way forward to promote this program, because there are amazing opportunities here for our adult learners, both young right out of school and those who are older. So I appreciate this work, and I do think I appreciate the recommendations. I think they're well thought out, and I think we need to keep moving forward. Don't get discouraged. Because I think the majority of this board is behind you, and we're going to continue to make improvements to this program because it is so important for our community at large. I know.
Good timing, Ms. Derenak-Kovacs.
I was like, woo. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, and thank you, Mr. Graham and everybody for this really great work. And I just wanted to mention, I know you had started your conversation about looking to add other committee members this year or organizations this year. And I'm the chair of the Public Engagement Committee, and we've been working on our forum topic around our advisory committees actually in that process. So we're actually had a lot of good work today, really close to bringing our recommendations to the board. So hopefully you should have a good process soon for adding additional members or bringing those suggestions to the board. So I just wanted to kind of update you on that piece of it. And then I really appreciate these recommendations, especially around, let's take the lessons we've learned from what we have to do virtually and try to use that to expand access to our really great ACE programming. There's a couple of thoughts. My other job is actually a college professor, and I teach a lot of online courses, and I have since 2006. So I was, kind of there well before we were in this world. And so one of the things you want to think about as we're going and continuing the online is accessibility. Right, and to make sure, and sometimes it can be quite expensive when we're looking at accessibility issues for people with disabilities in that online platform. So just something to kind of put out there as you continue to work on that is how do we ensure accessibility issues and that our online classes are accessible. The other thing I'd just put out for something to consider is looking at our driver's training programs. And looking at issues for students with disabilities. I had 2 emails today in my inbox around students with disabilities and driver's training. So I think it's a room to look at just to make sure that our programs are differentiated and scaffolded in a way that is accessible to the needs of students with disabilities. So something to put out there for you as well. And then the other piece I think would be really great when we talk about marketing our great ACE programming is to do some intentional collaboration with Department of Special Services, right, and our special education students, especially those who are leaving Davis and Pulley and STEP and maybe graduating and looking for additional, but may not have had access to our academy programs, for example, to take back from the previous report because of the need to take intervention classes and other classes, but may benefit from the great programming ACE has for certifications and career. So I think that's a really great place to do some sort of intentional marketing. So just a few suggestions, but I think you have some great ideas. And I love the idea of trying to expand accessibility and marketing by using that online platform. It's actually following along the lines of what a lot of colleges have done to expand access to students who didn't traditionally have access to college degrees, and also expand the pool of students available for colleges to help with enrollment at colleges. So it mirrors really what higher education's been doing for a while in the online platform. So thank you very much. And, I welcome any comments or thoughts you have on what I shared, but really I appreciate all the hard work you've done this year.
Oh, thank you. We have had conversations about accessibility, but I think probably not specifically, well, especially with online and also with driver's ed. So I think those are important and interesting things that we should continue to look at. So thank you.
And just one last thing, I've done some work with some of our county supervisors around, practice traffic stops for students with disabilities, but it's something that I think would actually be very valuable for a lot of students, for both our, officers and our students. So just something to consider as well as part of the driver's education programming.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. Now we have Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. McLaughlin, followed by Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Great, thank you. First, not only do I appreciate the committee's hard work and Brian's leadership, but also very much appreciate my Braddock appointee, Ken Balbueno, doing significant amount of research analysis. And I know our time hasn't really allowed for that, but I will want to ask him to just before I finish my comments, Ken, can you just spotlight for us what you felt were some of the most impactful findings from all that research that you did that the board really should take under careful consideration?
Sure, and thank you for the appointment. I greatly appreciate serving on the committee. It's been a great year. I would say the biggest takeaway really from the data analysis is that in general, the instructors preferred to teach in person over virtual, 100% virtual. That said, when you compare virtual versus hybrid, if you break the classes down into which classes are classroom based and which ones are more tech or lab based, for example, there is a preference to teach hybrid over virtual in some cases, and then there's a preference to teach in person over over hybrid in other cases. I would say the classroom-based classes, there's a greater preference to teach hybrid than virtual. And then for tech-based classes, they obviously prefer much more in-person over hybrid. So that's definitely something to consider when you're looking at that. And I have all those summaries at the very end of the report as well for the quantitative findings. Also, instructors who feel prepared to teach online or feel like they have the necessary tools, they also preferred to teach virtual over hybrid or in person. So that's a consideration for a staff when they're hiring instructors. If they're looking to increase the number of virtual sections that they are offering, they may want to look for teachers who feel more confident and more prepared to teach online. There's also an increase in perceived student engagement for that. When you look at the student surveys greatly mirrored the exact same findings of the instructor surveys, except when you measure for statistical significance, there's greater statistical significance in the instructor surveys than there are in the students. And I think a big part of that is because there's a greater representation of instructors and disciplines in the instructor survey versus the students, where you didn't have as great of a representation of the various different disciplines. So I think that definitely impacted things. But I think what was most interesting is to see that there were some mirrored findings between the instructor surveys and the student surveys.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to encourage our superintendent and his team to dig a little deeper with you on the data, because everything the decisions we make need to be driven by that, especially when we're looking at costs. Switching over to costs, I know we just don't have time tonight, but I want to spotlight for my colleagues. Ms. Darren Koufax in particular knows for our entire time on the board, there's been a real understanding that unless the board of supervisors want to give us more money, we've got to be really mindful where our K-12 mission is. And so I really appreciate page 9, Brian, you and your team making sure that we had the net income changes. And I encourage the superintendent that your team come back to us sooner rather than later about the net income drop and challenges that ACE is facing. I also noted on page 9, Exhibit 1, the enrollment numbers that Dr. Anderson was asking for. They're significant. So I would ask our chair, Brian, what conversations did you have with FCPS staff about this dramatic drop, and how is that going to impact then the budget needs rolling in from this ending cycle going into the next FY22 budget?
Right. Well, there is going to be significant budget need, and I think that's kind of why we were asking basically anywhere money can come from to help support and fill in the gaps, because there were a lot of programs that were not offered. Basically, I think all of the K-12 programs, except for eventually Behind the Wheel, were suspended for this time period, just as an example. So if you look at the year to year, there's a kind of a huge decrease in that. And then some of the courses really just were not able, if they have in-person, like plumbing classes, teaching you how to do certain things or whatever, obviously that doesn't really translate to an online version.
Yeah.
Discussions that we had in the committee that talked about, why some things were not offered, but on top of that, there were just reduction in enrollments, maybe, there could be a variety of reasons for that, but there's certainly kind of a gap left from that that basically need to find a way to resolve and get back to where we were before the pandemic, at the very least.
Yeah, the FY 2019 year enrollments, then looking at the big drop in 20 and the bigger drop in 21 fiscal years, it's almost staggering. Prior boards, we've talked about the importance of adult ESOL is a core mission for a strong community. That's always got to remain a high priority for ACE and for our board to support, and then CTE development. But we also talk about how NOVA, Northern Virginia Community College, and also FCPS's CTE offerings, how those then overlay with ACE. So I think we're going to need to really have some intentional work as a board with the superintendent and ACE. This is going to be a critical year for that. And the only other thing I would say is, overall, I really appreciate the fact that there are areas like behind the wheel that are some of the best in the county, and that's where ACE, I think, is really successful along with the ESOL. And sadly, I've run out of time.
If I just may briefly respond, we do have discussions about kind of preventing overlap and things like that. We view kind of ACE programs, ACE programs are much cheaper than a community class course, as an example, right? So if that's not something that we want to provide that way, we need to look for ways to provide, and maybe this is not just FCPS mission or whatever, but that's what we talk about the county as a funding mechanism for this. If these are things we want to connect residents to educational opportunities to help them build their own careers and provide for their families, then we need to find some ways to do those. Obviously, the division is required to have adult ESOL. Adult ESOL has its clear purpose, but there's also it's covered with the grant. But personally, I would like for us to have free adult ESOL, right? Like, why shouldn't we be teaching people in Fairfax County English? But that takes an investment from that's going to take a huge investment, and we you can't rely on just the school transfer or the K through 12 school budget to do that. So there's certainly opportunities and things that we still need to have serious conversations about. Yeah. So I think that I do see that Mr. Polio has his hand raised. So I'm assuming he wanted to address some part of your comment as well.
I'm going to actually, Mr. Graham, I'm going to actually suggest two things. One, obviously, Mr. Polio does have his hand up so he can address the adult ESOL. But your comments about the synergies and the disconnects with Northern Virginia Community College class offerings, I think Dr. Presidio should just briefly talk a little bit about the conversations with Northern Virginia Community College and the difference now having those conversations with the G3 program, in which community college courses are paid for by the state under that get skilled, get a job, give back. And so really more closely aligning all three aspects, the CTE, the ACE, and NOVA.
Brian,
Dr. Presidio.
Brian, let's make sure we get the skipped meeting together with Supervisor Lusk. That's definitely an important one.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Just real briefly, because I think Ms. Corbett Sanders, you did a good job kind of setting that up. But just again to remind, not to remind, to let folks know that we are continuing to have conversations with NOVA and George Mason University about how we can continue to partner to help use our programs like our ACE program as a stepping stone and a starting point for adult learners to get re-engaged with education. And oftentimes it happens through the context of, upskilling basically for their current jobs and that they're currently in, which will then get them on a track hopefully to complete certifications and degree programs, both at NOVA and at George Mason University. So we've been partnering in this effort for a while. Previously, what our partnership oftentimes has looked like, and Brian has already mentioned it, is not overlapping in the programs and not competing for the same students. But what we're really attempting to do now is to align and articulate our programs through ACE all the way through the community college and the four-year university system. So we're excited to continue that partnership work. We do have another meeting set up coming, I think it's actually next week again. And I do want to thank and acknowledge Ms. Corbett Sanders' work and leadership in helping us along the way in this partnership. And we're also working with county staff and Board of Supervisor members in this work as well.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. Mr. Polio.
Thanks, Ms. Corbett Sanders. I just wanted to, I guess, maybe piggyback a little bit on something that Ms. McLaughlin said earlier and just talking about adult ESOL, and then also Brian, that I think one of our challenges, probably our biggest challenge for adult ESOL in the past year was, we had computers, we had teachers that were ready to teach, and we kind of ramped up very quickly, but our community did not have access to laptops. Our community did not have, so I think this is definitely an area of advocacy for both the board and for us as staff with the county and with our community members, that, our families, when, many of our families, as you know, the only laptop they may have is the laptop that their child is bringing home with them from FCPS. And for many of our adult ESOL students, just weren't able to participate in our virtual classes because they didn't have access to a laptop. So we would love to be able to continue, as Mr. Graham said, I think moving forward, both in person and virtual classes. But that will definitely be contingent upon our ability to provide laptops or just work with the county so that more members of our community can have access to technology. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Mr. Polio. It's so important. And now I have Ms. Keys-Gamarra followed by Ms. Pekarsky.
Thank you. First, I want to start by thanking my ACE committee, Brian, who has been such a vocal supporter of this initiative for so many years.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra, we're having a little bit of a challenge hearing you. It sounds like you're speaking through a wire mesh. Could you maybe adjust your...
Is that better? Let me turn my camera on. Is this any better?
No, unfortunately it's not. Could I please go to Ms. Pekarsky and have you
come back in? Sure.
Great, thank you. Ms. Pekarsky.
You heard me, right?
I mean, you can thank me again later, but yes, I did hear you. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and thank you, Mr. Graham, and everybody on the committee for your work and your time, especially this year, which has been unlike any other. I found your report very, very helpful, and I agree we need to use the data to kind of catch up to, where we are now after the pandemic and being able to offer more individualized approaches to really expand the reach of these courses and the number of people who can participate. I'm also supportive of helping to advocate to our Board of Supervisors for greater resource allocation. The lifelong learning is part of their strategic plan goals. So I definitely see a space there for collaboration going forward. And I'm also, interested on our end how we can utilize some of our family engagement strategies to help market some of these ACE courses more, especially to our parents, because the reality is that if we can, ensure that our own families know that there are options out there for them, ultimately it does support our kids. It is kind of a circle, but at the end of the day, it really, really does come back. Stronger families ultimately support all our students. So I don't have any questions, but I really wanted to share those thoughts. And I look forward to speaking through the skipped or how we continue this conversation and advocacy. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Is this any better?
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to start by thanking Brian again because he told me to. But we really do appreciate all the hard work. And I'm glad to go behind Ms. Pekarsky. I think it's Providence because, while we are truly in its purest form directed at K through 12, this is something, these services impact adults who need to be a vital part of our economy, our community, be able to support their kids. And if we don't support them, then they can't do any of those things. So the more that we have these conversations tonight, the more that I am finding myself advocating for, specific programs that our Board of Supervisors needs to be aware that we need their support and funding for. And so I just, I throw that out there for my colleagues to consider, because I, for one, would not be comfortable to see this go away without a broader discussion. Is it going to be provided through NOVA? How is it going to be provided? Otherwise, we're going to have parents who can't contribute, who probably won't be able to enter the workforce as successfully. And so those are all really big concerns. So I know that this is not a part of tonight's discussion, but we had a headline from ACE this week with respect to expanding locations. Before I go into that, I do want to say I fully support the expansion of the use of virtual where appropriate, and we can get perhaps the county to pay for some laptops. But speaking of money, but if you could speak to that expansion that happened, that was recently approved, I think it might be helpful to the community, or if anyone could speak to that so that we have maybe greater understanding.
Yeah, I think probably it would be helpful if I could speak to that a little bit.
Sure.
So the board did approve on the consent agenda at the last board meeting the expansion of a new lease that will allow us to expand our program offerings in the Herndon region. And essentially, the existing lease space that we have is expiring, and we have a significant need. Right now, our programs in the Herndon area are confined to some pretty small space, including some trailers at Herndon Middle School. So this new lease is going to give us the opportunity to expand our adult ESOL programming, our registration and assessment for incoming English language learners in our system, as well as additional ACE classes and additional adult education classes. So basically, what that article was referencing is a new lease that's going to replace an expiring lease that the board approved in the last board meeting.
Okay, well, thank you. I know in years past, we reduced the number of locations for ACE, and now we have, as far as I recall, and now we've had more virtual. And so I wanted to make sure the community understood exactly what that meant, because we never had a discussion. But overall, bravo, support the recommendations, Brian. Really appreciate all the hard work, all the research. And I'm looking forward to, excuse me, us collaborating to make sure that we can get continued support for these programs. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Before I close out this session, I do want to just briefly provide some comments, because this committee is an amazing committee made up of dedicated professionals who are passionate about ensuring that we have a lifelong learning culture here in Fairfax County. And so we very much appreciate all you're doing. And I am glad that you are going to meet with the SCIP team. As part of that SCIP team, you will also be meeting the Opportunity Neighborhoods folks. And the Opportunity Neighborhoods folks are people that actually have monthly meetings with people that include groups like United Communities, but all the groups that support populations in those areas that have some of the most challenging situations with food security and housing security. And so I think this will be great for you all to do that. But I would urge that going forward, in addition to looking at making sure people in those communities know about ACE programming, that we also ensure that our counselors at each of our secondary school levels are aware of the certificate programs available through ACE, because some of our students may have a full academic schedule, but would like to get certificates. that allow them to earn more than a living wage out as soon as they graduate from high school, and also to support their college experiences. And so I don't know how we make that happen, but perhaps that might be part of your charge for next year, is to how we infuse or we more closely align our CTE work with the ACE programming work as well.
I know that's been mentioned in past years, so I think spending the focus on that would be helpful. I would just like to thank again Mr. Ken Balbuena for his numerous hours looking at the data, analyzing it through statistical tools and things like that. But really the full committee for their support, and Mr. Varconi and Ms. Passman, since they're here, for their support this past year. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Brian, for all of your hard work as well. And with that, it is 9:30. I wasn't able to catch us up, but this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.